committee of a whole meeting of the Board of Education for Monday, May 23rd, 2016. We have a roll call, Mrs. Perino?
Okay, Simmons?
Here.
Odom? Here. Carroll? Here. Marks? Present. Ford? Here. Huckabee? Here. Paredes?
Here, and a quorum is present. First on the agenda, we have audience comments. At this time, we have no one who signed up to offer any audience comments. We'll move on to the next item, which is a presentation on the gifted program audit. Dr. Dester.
Thank you very much. Dr. Lorp, would you please introduce our presenter for this evening?
We have Dr. Eric Palmer, who is from the Center for Talent Development from Northwestern. He provided a full report out to our gifted backup community last one of the days last week. And so gave a full report and now is going to give that report to all of you. So, Dr. Palmer.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to come and speak to you tonight. We've given you quite a bit of detail in the printed version of this, but I know you have a lot of things on your agenda tonight, so I'll kind of just touch on some highlights, and then we'll also provide some more detailed recommendations into the data to the district. But a little background on the purpose of our study. We were asked to do kind of a broad level formative assessment. So in other words, we weren't here to evaluate any one person or any one particular aspect of the program, but rather to take kind of a broad-based look at the opportunities that are available for gifted and academically advanced students within the district, and to do a little bit of benchmarking in terms of looking at where things stand in the district today compared both to similar districts around the Midwest, as well as in comparison to the National Association for Gifted Children programming standards. So we did that through a mixed methods research design that included some objective kind of standardized assessment elements, as well as through some qualitative data collection that we accomplished through a survey that was administered to both parents and to educators in slightly different versions, but that were parallel to one another. And again, the elements of that survey are based on the National Association for Gifted Children's best practice standards. And then to make sure that we were interpreting the patterns of data that we saw in the survey data correctly, and to drill down into some of the things that we observed when we took a preliminary look at the standardized assessment data. We came back and conducted some folk interviews with students, with groups of teachers and administrators, and then with groups of gifted and academically advanced students. So I'll share the results of this in a couple of parts. The first part, I'll summarize some of the highlights that we saw from the assessment data, and then in the second part, I'll share some consensus things that we saw in the qualitative parts of this. Okay. So first of all, a little bit of background to give you some context of the data that you'll see in this next part. The assessments that we administered with students in the district were the ACT, which is the same ACT that most students take when they're 11th or 12th graders and are starting to apply to colleges and universities and look at scholarships. But we administered that with 6th through 8th grade students, and we use that several years above grade level. And what that does is it kind of removes that ceiling effect that you often run into when you try to assess very bright and academically advanced students with grade level tests that are really designed to measure how well they've mastered grade level expectations. So by using these assessments above grade level, that lets us see not only are students doing well at grade level, but how far advanced are they, and that gives us a better sense of sort of what degree of differentiation and enrichment and acceleration a particular student or group of students might need in order to experience optimal challenge while they're in school. The test that we used with younger students was the Explore test, which you can kind of think of as the ACT Junior. It's typically taken by 8th grade students and used by high schools to place students into high school level classes, but we administered that with students in in grades 3 through 5, again, for the same reason. The next set of slides that I'll show you show some comparison data, these will show how well the district compares to a matched set of students that we created from other students that we test around the Midwest from districts that are economically similar. You'll see that this is presented in the form of percentiles, and so you'll see some percentiles that are in the 30s and 40s, and so a lot of times when we first showed that, school districts go, oh my gosh, these are our highest achieving students, and they're at the 30th or 40th percentile. What's important to understand is that all of the students that participate in this above grade level assessment program are students who are either identified as gifted by their school districts or who have scored at or above the 90th percentile on a grade level test. So we're comparing the students from this school district to a very select group. So bear that in mind as you kind of look at these data. So the Explorer and ACT both look at reading, math, and science, and I'll show you kind of a snapshot of each of these. But you'll see that in reading, in math, and in science, the overall pattern is similar with local students underscoring by some margin students from other economically similar districts. One thing that we should note here, though, is that some of the other students had an opportunity to access kind of a preparatory toolkit. It wasn't a drill and practice kind of program, but just kind of initial orientation to the assessment. So that might slightly affect the pattern of scores that you see here in a way that would put Flossmoor at a small disadvantage, but overall we think this kind of holds up. One thing that we would like to point out here is that even though the District 161 students as a group scored slightly lower than students from the comparison districts that we created, some encouraging signs are that, first of all, the overall pattern, if we look back and forth through these, the gap between the other school districts, the comparison school districts, and this district is actually smaller at the upper grades than it is at the lower grades, so that suggests some positive things are happening in terms of narrowing that gap, but still some opportunities for growth and improvement. And this shows the overall composite score across grade levels. Now, bear in mind that these are looking at the whole group of students that we tested at Flossmoor versus the whole group of students in the comparison group. But one other thing that we wanted to point out, in addition to looking at the overall pattern of the group, is that when we look just within the District 161 data, is that we saw a lot of variability among students tested. So some of these students were kind of at the low end of the overall group of students that we tested, but we also saw some extremely high performing, extremely high scoring students within this district. So for example, in the middle school data, we saw 3 students who already had ACT scores that were at or above the average score that most students would have entering the freshman class at the University of Illinois Champaign-Urbana. So that tells you a little bit about kind of the level of challenge there is in terms of adequately differentiating, for a 7th or 8th grade student, the curriculum in a substantive enough way so that a student that is, a little bit above average versus, a student that is already outperforming, at least on one measure, many students at a selective university that are many years older than they are. So next I'll share a few highlights from the survey and focus group data that we looked at. And we had 96 parents overall respond to the invitation to participate in the survey, as well as 66 educators. Again, the 2 surveys were designed to be parallel to each other so that we could look for areas of consensus between stakeholder groups as well as areas of difference. And then we came back and conducted a set of focus group interviews with some of the people that participated in these other surveys. So I'll start with sharing some positive things that we saw in the qualitative data. First of all, we saw a pattern that suggested some really great things in terms of overall school culture and climate. So for example, very high numbers, even in comparison to some other districts that we've looked at, reported that they believe their schools value high academic achievement, that they value this group of students and their abilities and talents, and that they recognize that gifted students come from all different kinds of families and all different kinds of linguistic and cultural backgrounds, and include students that might be very gifted in some areas but have disabilities or learning difficulties in other areas. We also saw, again, even in comparison to some other districts that we've evaluated, a relatively high percentage of teachers reporting that they were doing some degree of differentiation of their curriculum in an attempt to better meet the needs of the gifted and advanced students within their classrooms. Although there were differences within that, and in those focus group interviews, some teachers told us that they aspire to do it every day, but for a variety of reasons, weren't always able to do that. We also heard a lot of positive things about flexibility in terms of teachers and principals being willing to do some things flexibly in terms of grouping to bring together students that have similar needs and interests so that they can be more effectively served. In some cases, that was happening systemically with building and district leadership, and some of those instances seemed like it involved some kind of teacher-to-teacher kind of grassroots kind of organization, but the overall view is we really saw some openness to doing that. So that can be built upon. And then we also heard a lot of positive comments about members of the gifted education team from teachers in terms of the value of what they call push-in services, which is when a gifted education specialist comes into the classroom to work with a small group or to model the teaching of some kinds of lessons. And some teachers requested that to happen on a more frequent basis. So we'll talk about that a little bit more in our recommendations. Now we'll jump to talking about some areas where we see some potential for improvement that we think would advance the district towards some of its goals. First of all, just in terms of communication, one of the things that was interesting, particularly in the parent survey, is that on some of the items that asked about processes for selecting students to participate in advanced programs and different kinds of enrichment opportunities, we had a fairly large number of parents that responded don't know or not sure in response to some of our questions, which suggests to us some potential benefit from some enhanced efforts to communication. I know there's a committee that's been formed to work on some of those issues, so and we'll provide some more specific guidance on that as well. Many stakeholders noted concern about the relative underrepresentation of students of color and for students from economically disadvantaged households, particularly compared to the district population as a whole. So you'll see some of the recommendations that we make are geared towards improving that representation, ensuring that more students have an opportunity to achieve and participate in those very high-level programs. We also heard this is one of the areas where we had some disparity between what we heard from educators and what we heard from families in some cases, relative to some of the subjective components of the selection process, where some teachers like the opportunity to advocate for students that maybe didn't perform where we would expect them to on the test, but they saw sort of non-quantitative evidence that these students would benefit from programs, wanted to be able to advocate for those. In some cases, parents perceived that subjectivity as an area of bias, and then some teachers were a little bit comfortable with being sort of in between the selection process and the desire to have a good, constructive, working relationship with the families of the children that they're serving most directly. Some educators also question the appropriateness of some of the assessments that are used in that process. So you'll see later we make some specific recommendations about a few adjustments to the different instruments that are used and ways to interpret that data in a way that we think is a little bit more defensible. We also noted some potential areas for improvement related to curriculum and instruction. While the perceptions of what was happening just within the ACE program were positive overall, we did have some students tell us that they would appreciate an even higher level of challenge, even though when we asked them, in what setting do you experience the highest level of challenge right now, ACE was the overwhelmingly most popular answer. We also heard a little bit of disparity in terms of talking about the math curriculum. Many students told us math was the most challenging subject for them, but then we also had a subset of students that felt like math was the area that they needed the greatest increase in challenge. So we'll make some suggestions related to that as well. And again, we noted that even though a very large percentage of teachers are making some efforts at differentiation, there were also a very large number that told us that they would like a lot more opportunities to develop in that area and would appreciate more opportunities for support and collaboration in order to do that in a more systemic and ongoing way. And in particular, formats for professional development that teachers thought would be particularly impactful, and that we actually support kind of based on experiences in other districts and looking at some of the national research, rather than providing training in a very purely theoretical kind of traditional workshop format, providing some opportunities for peer observation, peer coaching, collaboration with specialists, and bringing in some model curriculum as kind of a starting place for looking at ways to apply some of those curriculum design strategies to units and lessons in local classrooms. Just talk about that one a little bit. And again, just noting that there were mixed perceptions about learning in math. One of the areas that we had a lot of concern expressed from parents on was about the validity and level of challenge of the homework that they were seeing in math. Some of this we think might be attributable to the transition into the Common Core math, which is much different in many ways than the math that you and I experienced in school. So we think this is an area that may benefit from some additional collaboration, but we also think that there are some opportunities to do more significant differentiation in math. Because again, we saw some students that were performing at very high levels, and that we think would benefit from curriculum and practice opportunities that go beyond kind of the recommendations that you might get from just grade level math testing. A few other notable findings from the qualitative side of the project. We talked with a lot of groups about what they perceived as current strengths. One of the things, and there's visual evidence of this as you walk through this building, so it's nice to have props behind me, but one of the notes that we heard a lot about was the visual arts programs here in the district were a local strength that many people took great pride in and would like to see extended, although many people from both groups noted a gap in the programming in grades 7 and 8, and so with some additional opportunities there where students would have an opportunity to continuously develop their talent, we think that could become a real point of pride and even greater strength than it is already today in the district. We also asked parents and students about what their interests were in potential expansions and programs, and we had an overwhelming number of parents identify STEM-related opportunities as being very high interest in things that, if they were available, would strongly encourage their children to participate in. And so we'll give you some recommendations on that here in just a second as well. And then third, parents and educators agreed that their school should focus on differentiating and accelerating for certain students those core curriculum areas first before looking at a lot of expanded stuff beyond. So based on all of that data, some of the recommendations that we're making to the district are, first of all, to focus on increased opportunities for communication with families. We think that the committee, the ad hoc committee that we got to meet last week was a great start for that. We would also look at recommending opportunities to communicate more about opportunities for advanced students online through your website, through your social media footprint, particularly for families that would have difficulty being part of an ongoing committee process or have an interest, as well as potentially looking for opportunities to integrate information with other parent and family events, such as parent-teacher conferences, open houses, and other events that happen within the school. Second, we would suggest starting with interest-based opportunities in the STEM areas, particularly related to coding and engineering. Right now, there's not a lot of great standardized, assessment out there to identify who's super exceptional, and we also know that a lot of students haven't had opportunities in those areas. So at least in the early years, we would recommend having a pretty open door to students based on their interests in those areas, and then as students have an opportunity to kind of showcase their talents and to demonstrate interest, then look at building on with more selective and competitive kinds of opportunities like external competitions and those kinds of things. We would also recommend providing opportunities for role-specific professional development. Based on the feedback that we received from teachers, we think that should start with providing more opportunities for professional development related to curriculum differentiation strategies. And then for the gifted education specialists and the ACE team and some members of the school leadership team, we would recommend some professional development on the latest research-based practices in identifying giftedness and emerging talent in diverse populations like we have here in the district. Professional development on grouping strategies that can enhance curriculum differentiation without producing permanent kinds of tracking that would limit opportunities for students whose talents might emerge later, or might not have had as many opportunities to learn outside of school or before they enter kindergarten. And professional development on coaching and collaboration strategies, since that was the preferred mode of professional development delivery for your general education teachers, to look at some specific research-based strategies for doing that in the most effective way possible. In terms of identification, the process for selecting students for ACE and other opportunities, we recommend potentially starting that process sooner. The main reason for that is that the achievement gap that you see nationally in almost every school district around the state, if you look at the Illinois state report card, the achievement gap between disadvantaged groups of students and non-disadvantaged groups of students gets wider each year of school. And even though the traditional view of giftedness was that it was kind of a trait that you were born with, like hair color or eye color, more recent research backs the idea that it's really more developmental, and that the opportunities that students have from an early age matter. But the earlier you begin the identification process, the more likely you are to catch some of these students, particularly from lower income families, that would otherwise slip through the cracks and would look more like an average student if you waited longer to begin that identification process. We also have some concerns about using the NWEA MAP test for identifying students for the most selective opportunities or for participating in that sort of automatic screening process We think that math is a great assessment for looking at mastery of grade level content, but even though it is a computer adaptive test, it's only adaptive to the extent of the item bank that it can draw from, and the reliability of that assessment breaks down quite a bit once you get into the 90s. So rather than expecting students to reach the 90th percentile or higher before that automatic, more extensive assessment process happens, we would encourage you to at least invite families to opt in if they score at the 80th percentile or higher on that, or score at the exceeds level on the new state park assessment. We also have some concerns about some of the specific observation checklists that we're using, so we've made a recommendation there. And then also we looked at some of the specific criteria that are used for selecting students for programming in specific content areas, and have made some recommendations related to making some adjustments there that we think would help students that would most benefit from those programs and have the best chance of being successful be selected. Again, going back to the fact that we did see among the whole group of students some extremely advanced students within the district population. We think the levels of service philosophy that you speak of in your existing program documents should be maintained. We think that that can be even further enhanced by providing opportunities for more significant kinds of acceleration for those very top students who, even within a grade level program, a grade level enrichment program, would be well beyond many of their peers, even in that group. And so a couple of elements that we think the district can do fairly quickly, and it would benefit some of those very advanced students, would be kind of formalizing policies and procedures related to whole grade acceleration. So a student that would typically be a fourth grader next year based on their chronological age being able to go on to fifth grade instead, as well as acceleration, kind of change of placement acceleration in individual subject areas. So maybe I'm a sixth grade student most of the day, but I'm really advanced in math. So I might, instead of going to an enrichment program in math for sixth graders, I could go to a seventh or eighth grade math class where that curriculum is going to be presented. There are a couple of good models out there that we suggest that you start from. First, the policy, Ohio's got a great model acceleration policy. And then we know that educators and some families have concerns about the social aspects of a younger student being in a learning setting with older students. So we really like the IO acceleration scale. It's a holistic assessment process that looks at the cognitive and academic factors, but also looks at some of those social and emotional developmental factors and gives you a really research-based way to kind of weave those together to make a decision that fits the whole child. In terms of curriculum, in terms of some models that the district might look at to gain some practical differentiation strategies, three that are really well designed core curriculum areas for the William and Mary English Language Arts units. These are targeted gifted students, but there are supplemental resources that have been developed so these can be used successfully school-wide. That was demonstrated through a federal research project in the state of Virginia a few years ago. The project M2 and M3 mathematics units that are also commercially available. And then for getting some ideas to possibly kick off some enrichment and talent development opportunities in the STEM areas, the Boston Museum of Science has created some really phenomenal curriculum resources, many of which are available at no cost, that are pre-aligned to the next generation science standards, so they'll fit really well into existing curriculum models. And then I'll just leave you with just a few commendations. First of all, we know that it's always stressful for teachers and administrators to invite a third party in to look at things critically and then to give feedback in a public forum with really no filter. But we were met with really open doors and a lot of transparency everywhere we went in terms of both teachers as well as top-level administrators being willing to share feedback with us and really thoughtful feedback from parents as well. And then lastly, I'd just like to compliment your students. We pulled together several groups of students to participate in focus groups, and all of our focus group facilitators commented on just how seriously students took the process and how extremely articulate even the younger students were in being able to provide very specific feedback about their experiences and what they wanted to see more of and do more of in their school. So I will stop there for now, but I'd be happy to entertain any questions. So thank you.
Does anyone have any general questions? Mrs. Marks?
For clarity, we had 96 parents participate. How many were asked to participate and how many were asked to participate?
I can give you that number. I think the number that we invited was about 160 something. I can give you the exact number after this if you're interested. We invited them through an email invitation. I believe that was prefaced with some communication from the school district. So we sent an invitation and we sent a follow-up about 2 weeks after that initial invitation to the families that hadn't responded.
Okay, and that was 96 separate participants from separate families or just 96 participants?
It was one invitation per family, so those 96 participants should all represent individual families.
Families, we didn't have multiple, okay. And how often, you mentioned an ad hoc group, how often did that ad hoc group meet? How many people were on
We
that?
started it in the 11-12 school year, and we met every year but last year, and then took a break because of this audit, and then got back together again this year.
So how many times a year?
1 time a year. The very first year, in 11-12, I think we probably met 4 or 5 times to develop our transition to what we had audited here. And then after that, the second year when we worked on Parker, we met probably 3 times, and then after that, it was
Okay, thank you. Also, you mentioned in there that parents commented on a gap in the gifted arts in 7th and 8th. I'm wondering if that's a misprint. I believe we have 8th grade gifted art, but we don't have a 6th or 7th grade
So
gifted
they're
art.
identified, you're correct.
So was that incorrect in there? I don't know if it's incorrect or not, but I.
Yeah, I will clarify that.
6 and 7.
Okay, so we would get clarification on that. All right, can you comment on the studies that show the future academic success of students who are identified as gifted in the elementary school at any part along the way, and how they vary with the students who are on the margins of the
Sure. If we are talking specifically about those populations of students that are currently underrepresented that we're trying to increase representation of,
Not just all students, any students who currently participate, not underrepresented.
Okay.
But who are in a gifted program and how they do compared to students.
Sure. We only have 1 year of data from the district, so right now this is just a snapshot of all the students across, so we would need a second year of data to look at how students are growing based on whether or not they're participating in programs. My hunch is that we would see students that are participating growing faster just on the basis of the fact that we saw those gaps between high achieving students within Flossmoor and the comparison group of districts that we created from our regional data set. Getting smaller at those older grades, but it could just be, that's a particularly good group of kids in those cohorts, and we would see something different if we followed those. But in the national research, opportunity does matter a lot in terms of students' progress. Students that have opportunities to learn at the highest level level that they're available, so the students that are in the advanced group, if they continue to have advanced opportunities, you would actually see their growth accelerate. So optimally, a student that is in the top, 10%, cognitively, should be able to make a year and a half to 2 years worth of growth in the same amount of time that an average student would make. So if we have kind of an assessment with an infinite range and optimal programming, we would expect to see those differences get wider over time. There's a great report called Overlooked Gems that the National Association for English Children put out a few years ago, and there was a follow-up to that just within the last year that looked specifically at the kinds of programming that most benefit talent development in students from economically disadvantaged populations and other groups that are currently underrepresented. One of the overarching findings that came out of that was that continuity matters. So doing something for 1 year and then stopping and then doing it for another year and then stopping, the effects of those kind of one-off programs didn't really stick. They produced a short-term increase, but then those students would basically regress towards the mean over time, whereas if they had 2 or 3 years worth of continuous programming, then the change in their trajectory had an opportunity to become permanent. The middle school years are particularly decisive in terms of whether students from disadvantaged backgrounds that are kind of high flyers in elementary continue on to high-level coursework in high school and then aspire to selected colleges and universities, because that seems to be a group where peer influence is most impactful. And then, of course, the early years are really more particularly providing resources for families. One other area that there's a lot of potential to make an impact is in terms of out-of-school learning. A lot of the differences that we see seem to be just related to the amount of time that students have to be engaged with strengths-based programming, curriculum that focuses on what they're good at and allows them to take that to a higher level. But a lot of the issue with gap seems to open up over the summer in a lot of places where students from families with more resources will do things like, send their kids back into summer programs, take family vacations, and even though students aren't in school, they continue to learn, whereas students from lower income families tend to have fewer of those opportunities, so they might make strong growth during the school year, but then over the summer, non-disadvantaged students would continue to grow while those students would fall back. And so looking at ways to provide some enrichment-oriented, talent development-oriented programming during the summer is another potential leverage point that would be really useful.
So I guess what I'm hearing is that what you're saying is that opportunities for expanded learning at an individual level benefit all students, not just a certain subset of students identified.
Yeah, I think all students benefit from opportunities to spend at least part of their school day, part of their learning in their strength. It's just that with these particularly advanced students, it's really difficult, for example, for any teacher in a general classroom to be able to consistently do enough to support that student that's 4 or 5 grade levels ahead.
So to take that though, so if we're talking about, you recommended at some point 80 students scoring at 80% and above on some tests, are we really targeting those children who are so outperforming the peer group, or that seems a very wide band at 80%?
And I'm not necessarily saying that the students that score at the 80th percentile on math automatically get placed in your most advanced courses, but that right now the process is that students that are at the 90th percentile on math then have additional assessment done to determine whether or not they should be placed in those more targeted programs for particularly advanced students. And we think that that threshold for getting that closer look should be lowered just because of some of the limitations of the math assessment.
Eric, if you don't mind, Dr. Gusser has a few questions that are related to Mrs. Marks' question.
I have just some clarifications. We've had a little less than a week to digest this, and we've been going over this with my administrative team already as we start to plan for next year. But I just want to clarify, and I'm not trying to put you in the spot, but there's some things here that are important to add. If you'll go back to the bar graph where we're talking about the junior high, and those scores are closer than what the elementary are compared to comparison districts. Okay, first of all, I know we're waiting for a comparison list of what those districts were. So I want to see those. But second of all, we've got the part that's coming, that's here for third grade, it's all the way through eighth grade. However, our junior high, we're in a traditional mode with some of our students that are taking Algebra 1 and that are taking Geometry, which are the high school, which are geared towards the ACT. They've changed the ACT, and that's the only thing you don't know, but just clarifying, they've changed the ACT to go to the SAT, so it's more comparable with the part testing. So all of that is in transition right now. And when we see those scores, because then we show other scores to the Board of Education at the elementary, it's different. It's lopsided. So I just want to clarify those things. There's no right or wrong to it, but this is a transition that's taking place for this. So I would imagine you will be using a different test in the future. Will it be the pre-SAT or?
We will actually be using or offering the PSAT. There's actually a new version of the PSAT. Historically, PSAT has been the year before students take the SAT. There's a new PSAT called PSAT 8-9. That's a level below the SAT. We've offered both the Explore ACT combination. We will be offering both the PSAT and SAT combination. And we would just guide school districts to use which set of that is most philosophically aligned with the local curriculum, so that's an option.
Right. Next thing, just real quick here, when we talked about the MAP scores, I don't think, Dr. Orr, what do we use that MAP score as far as the testing? It's just an indicator, a
Yeah,
screener?
screeners to identify who needed further testing.
Okay, so what is the normal percentage we use? Is it 93%?
90% and above identified who we would pull out for testing.
For this test, right?
For who gets screened for our programming 2 through 5.
All right, so I would think that the recommendation would be, we're looking at the new math, right? Possible. I thought I saw that.
Yeah, we would obviously love you to use our assessments that we offer, but we can also make one of the challenges with some of the new math assessments, particularly the ACT and SAT, because they are protected because they're very high stakes for college and university that require students to test on Saturdays. So in terms of your broad-based identification process, we think that this is an ideal instrument to use for kinds of program level evaluation purposes like this, but it wouldn't be what I would use exclusively in your identification process.
As one indicator. Okay, so how many students did we have? You said 160 families from the country?
Over 200.
Yeah,
Over 200.
we had more students participate in the assessment than we had families that responded to this.
Okay, so that was, if we drop that to 80%, that's going to increase significantly, I would imagine, compared to the 90% or cutoff.
In terms of the number of students that you would be assessing, but we wouldn't really recommend, because the UMass assessment is administered multiple years above grade level, we wouldn't necessarily recommend this as your first line assessment for those students that are at the immediate percentile, but we can recommend some assessments that we think have a little bit more of a range where you can use 1 or 2 grade levels off level that are what we call a shell test. So you can administer it during the school day with local staff instead of having to get everybody there.
Okay, and then just the last question, level of service. What you described is what we're doing in the district at this point. We've got some children that are really advanced in math, for example, and we're providing some extra assistance with that, and we have our ACE program. Just want to be clear, the level of service, that's what you meant by what you explained tonight.
I think, continuing on, we think that what you're offering now is doing a good job with a large percentage of your advanced students, but that some of those students, like those 3 middle school students, for example, that we mentioned, those students are really difficult to use to serve in even a differentiated or specialized grade level program. Kind of formalizing opportunities for those kinds of change placement forms of acceleration, like grade skipping. It's a more specialized thing that you wouldn't do with 10% of your students. You might do with 0.5% of students who would benefit from that whole grade acceleration. But I would be really clear that we're not advocating that you do grade acceleration in lieu of other kinds of programming, but rather that you offer it and kind of make it more systemic as a way to enhance that level of service model.
Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Smith.
About how many students are currently in the ACE program, district-wide?
I just looked at
Are the 205 students who participated here a subset of the current ACE program? So every one of those 205 students is in the ACE program, but there may be some ACE students who didn't participate for one reason or another. Okay. Do you have any opinion on how we currently qualify students for inclusion in the ACE program versus the virtual district that you built? Are our qualifications similar, more stringent, less stringent?
Okay. One thing to clarify on the virtual district, how we created that. Our program tests about 20,000 students across the Midwest annually, and we have demographic information on the districts that they come from. And so there were, the students that you see represented in that set actually come from a variety of school districts around the Midwest, but that are all in the same quartile as this district in terms of the percentage of students that are classified as economically disadvantaged and in the same quartile for mean household income. And so in terms of their process, sure.
The qualifications we use for ACE currently compared to a broader spectrum of the 20,000 or so students that you, are we in line, are we above that, or are we below that?
It's hard to answer because we don't have as detailed information about those other districts in terms of how they go about identifying those students. The recommendations that we make in terms of identification are more reflective of kind of the national research on best practices versus trying to model on any one other school district.
So when we see by subject across grades 3 through 8, the achievement of these 205 students versus the virtual district that you built, where we're below to materially below, almost without exception. Can we come to any conclusions just from observing those quantitative metrics? Like our kids aren't as accomplished as they should be, the ACE program as currently implemented isn't working the way it should be, or things like that, or is it too hard to pull a conclusion on it the numbers?
I think that we can say, as a group, that the students that we assess in this district could be doing better than they are compared to what we see in other economically similar districts. But also, I would say to bear in mind the fact that the ACT and the Explore, don't look at just what students learn in a particular setting. They look at sort of the totality of a student's knowledge within the blueprint of those assessments. And so, it may be that in the absence of ACE, they would be doing a lot worse rather than, so I would use this data to say that any one particular, it's not detailed enough to say any one particular part of the continuum of services that the district is providing are successful or not. And like I said, the qualitative, data, the comments we heard from parents and students were that, ACE, what students experience in ACE is closer to, what would be appropriate, but also, we got that feedback that could, at least for some of those students, be made even more challenging without them hitting, their level of frustration or feeling overwhelmed.
Is it also possible that 205 students are, let's call them for argument's sake, our top academic achievers, our top 200 academic achievers separated by grade, aren't all necessarily as gifted as the virtual district you built, based on other districts' identification of gifted, either subjectively or their 90%, economics aside.
Right.
If we would have picked 150 or 100, the real top of the top, our scores would have been more comparable. Is it possible that that's the case?
It's possible, but I would say that because we know that the students that we assessed here were scoring at or above the 90th percentile on a grade level assessment, and that virtually all of the students that participate in the new match program across the Midwest also meet that criteria. Now, because the comparison district is a virtual comparison district, it's possible that some of those students come from districts that are more selective in terms of their gifted programming, and some districts that are less selective. In research, in the absence of more detailed information, we would typically assume that any one particular case is more likely to be closer to the middle than it is one of the ends of that continuum, just because most things are close to the that's the nature of sort of that normal distribution curve. But you're right, we can't say definitively that as a group the comparison students from districts that are from a systematically more selective or less selective group, where we would be able to write this off from selection bias. But because this group of students came from such a large number of districts, we think to a certain extent the design kind of factors out some of that issue. But I think the alignment issue is probably a more legitimate, possible influencer on these scores. But I think because we see this pattern across grade levels and the difference is pretty significant, we feel pretty confident in saying that there is room to improve in this area.
If I might, these are great questions. And I had a reaction of, hey, my kid's in there somewhere. And I think that the important point of the audit is to understand how we can improve and understand where there's room for growth. When I work in my job with the most advanced students in my high school, and we're 2 years preparing to go on their senior year and on to college. And I know from there's always room for growth, and that this idea of gifted is somehow frequently linked with this idea of smarter, as opposed to having been provided opportunity along the way to build and to develop a cadre and to push back into other students with diverse background and gain some of their experiences and then grow from them as well. And so I thank you for all the work you've done. I did want to ask one question related to this. You had mentioned earlier that a lot of these schools had, perhaps maybe had some, perhaps time in terms of taking the test. And I was just wondering, as we are new to this program, what is the average number of years that other districts that we're comparing to have spent time in here? Or is it that everyone this year is new to this program because it's a new program itself?
At the third and fourth grade, almost all of those students, because that's where our program starts, will be first time testing.
Right, but the school itself, in terms of, for District 161, this is the first year that we're going with this program. So as a community, as a unit, as a school district, this is all turning over. Whereas, School X in this one community, which you've been working with for the past, 5, 6, 7, 8 years, is where part of the culture of the school is that you will, in your gifted program, participate in this, you will take this test at some point, and parents being the way they are immediately on top of, we're going to prep for this test at an early age. My wife, who is, I think, a fantastic educator, although no formal training, immediately decided my son has to get some sort of prep, and she found it very frustrating, is not knowing even what to do. So is that probable or likely or?
Just in terms of school-wide participation in this, we do have, a significant number of schools that encourage, families to participate. And we have had, individual families from this district, participate on their own previously, but obviously not in the numbers that we've had this time. Obviously we can't do much to control what families do at home in the materials that we provide online that the other students have access to. We expressed that, we think that families should use the material that we provide as a means to just make their students comfortable with the testing situation. And we actually try to discourage families from doing intensive sort of test prep. But we also would fully acknowledge that there are some families that are more competitive, in their orientation, that may be more kind of knowing what to expect. But I would say at least with these early grades where we see the most difference, that's a new experience at least for the students. And then like at the 6th grade level, that's the first year that students anywhere would have access to ECT itself. That's not to say, there aren't ECT preparation programs, that you can go out and buy. ECT itself will tell you that most of those programs don't produce much of a change, compared to just practice or just random test error between the student taking it once and taking it again. But there probably is, at least for some students, a familiarity factor in terms of their comfort level and expectations coming into a new situation.
I have 2 questions. Sure. Are you done?
Yeah, absolutely.
So the first question is, I appreciate the comparison between our district and the virtual district. But I am curious as to why we only use 1 year's worth of data. And what this doesn't tell me is really how our students are doing. I don't see anything that helps me understand, did the 6th grader in the ACE program from last year improve or grow in 7th grade or in 8th grade? So I don't really know how our students really are doing against themselves every year. I just have data that shows me how our district is doing compared to other districts. So we have the data, so why do we only just look at 1 year?
Well, in this report, we only look at 1 year of data because we've only done this assessment one time. So if we were to come back next year or in 2 years and do this again and had the same student participate, then we could look at individual growth and also patterns of growth within the district. We've done that with other schools. We'd be happy to talk with you about an opportunity to do that here. We've also, obviously in the public report, we didn't provide individual student level data, but we did provide student level data back to Dr. Work so that she could look at individual students in terms of how, at least comparing to that national benchmark they're doing. But again, to produce any kind of growth trajectory, we would need at least 2 data points. And right now, we only have 1 year of assessment data.
So I would imagine as you and your team, Dr. Duster, go back and assess this, tweak it, whatever it is that we plan to do with this data, the more information, the more, the closer you can get to creating a program that actually works better for our district. Knowing exactly how our students are doing from a year-to-year basis, to me, it is a better touch point in figuring out is the program working or is it not. My second question is, who are the 6th, 7th, and 8th graders that were tested? Because we have the ACE program in elementary school. That doesn't translate into anything at the junior high school level. There are kids who actually, as you know, come in that are up level, but the humanities, for example, doesn't really, we don't have a deeper program in the junior high school level. So who are the 6th and 7th, 8th grade kids who were used for this?
They were students that scored at or above the 90th percentile on the grade level assessment.
So was it a random sample of those? Because I have to imagine that there are more than the 200 in something. I'm assuming it was a random sample of those kids who scored in the 90th percentile.
We actually have Mr. Brzezinski every year with scheduling cluster of students. So when they've been identified at 5th grade and are coming over to 6th grade, those students remain clustered and get into the advanced classes at Harper. So we are actually tracking those students and keeping an eye on who those students were and their scores as they go to 6, 7, and 8. So we do have an identified group of kids who we do watch as they go through Harper.
Sure, but even those students that are in the advanced courses are not scoring in the 90th percentile every time they take the math test.
That would be data that I would have to look at. I can't answer that.
I mean, I can speak from my own example. I know that every single time my children have taken the math test and they are in advanced courses, it's a snapshot in time. So maybe they did it when they took it in the fall, maybe they didn't when they took it in. So I'm just trying to get an idea of who the kids really are that were used for 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, since that percentile fluctuates throughout the year.
Yeah, and the fact that we do see so much variability in your students' scores is, kind of speaks to the concern that we have, about using math scores as the primary, identifier, for, these are sort of at least being, sort of the gatekeeper score. We used it for selecting students, for this because it was, essentially what was available, and it was, it's reasonable. It's at least an objective assessment, but there weren't other criteria that we applied to the students that we invited, and we invited everybody in the district, identified a subset.
And then my last one is just a comment. I actually appreciate some of the recommendations that you made, especially my question has always been what happens to those kids who are on the bubble and whether or not they're even given the opportunity to participate in any of our enrichment type programs, so I appreciate that. But also your comment about the Renzulli and the culturally biased, the potential culturally biased aspect of that, so I appreciate that.
In your pocket, you said that when you did the interviews, did you hear anything that would speak to the may not have gotten to that from your interviews, and I know that was the purpose, but did you hear anything that would speak to, when Ray coming out of fifth grade, still kind of dealing with this, and then something happened, or anything that you're
We didn't, and, and I would also sort of bear in mind that at any one grade level, within the district, we're looking at, a relatively small, if you think about that whole 200 students and then divided across those grade levels, there is an opportunity with any one grade level, if you have one or two outlying students, to kind of skew those results, up or down. So, I would kind of take that with a little bit of a grain of salt. But no, we didn't, see anything in the comments that suggested that, seventh grade was great and eighth grade was terrible.
I wouldn't ask you, I was just trying to figure out if there's something that, because I know they talked a little bit about, you said about the curriculum and things that were available to us. I didn't know if there was something that was a correlation between parents or teachers and the parents. Great.
Yeah, nothing that I could sort of put my finger on.
Okay. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Sure. This is mine.
When did we stop using the luminary materials? We had them for a while. When did we stop using them?
I was reading about the law in there, and so
Yeah, we bought them.
And we did not do, a course by course curriculum audit. The things that I recommended there as models are just because we know that those are curriculum units that were developed, by people that, have extensive experience with this population and then have a track record.
Right, which is why we purchased that set. I was just curious as to when we stopped using them and why we're not.
Do you remember how long ago we used it?
No, but I would guess. I don't know, I know we purchased them, I know we got them. I don't know how, I don't believe they expire. I don't know how they're updated, but they're not, they're hard.
Some of them have recently been revised to be kind of realigned with the transition to Common Core, but the underlying sort of curriculum design model has remained, constant. So just as a focus for doing some kind of dissection work for professional development, if you already have some of those older units on hand, it would be a good jumping off point. If you're looking at adopting something, across the building or across the district, you might look at the revised versions that are out there.
I'm sorry.
It's just, I one more. This is just from your experience, one of the recommendations you made was there were some kids that were specifically were predicted in one particular area, considering moving to additional authority or so. And I know we're dealing with one challenge here at the school district right now. We have one person that's, because we've got them there so far out of there, we're sending them to high school, which does present opportunities, the social emotional piece, and just having it in school with 17-year-old clergymen. Have you experienced seeing how other school districts have addressed that issue? Because you keep moving kids up a grade at a certain point, your one's going to run out. Or, not run out, but they're going to go to high school, things like that.
Yeah, I mean, we, would always recommend, obviously, that, students have, opportunities to, have access to what fits them now, and then, as students move on into high school, if they do reach a level where they're starting to exhaust local opportunities, then look at things like, online programs, dual enrollment, programs with colleges and universities, independent study kinds of options, so I would look at, I would never look at like a sixth grader who's well ahead and say, well, we should let them move ahead because then they'll run out of math, because there will always be more math. But in terms of bringing that high school level content down to a lower grade level, some students actually do really well in that environment. In that IO acceleration scale that I mentioned has sections on social developmental issues that would kind of give you some data to go on to judge whether maybe this 11 or 12-year-old would be perfectly fine in that environment. But some other schools that have a larger group of those, will bring, you know, a high school teacher down to the middle school for a period of day and offer a high school level course in the middle school. In our programs at CTD, we have an online program that serves, you know, a lot of students that are advanced in an individual subject area, particularly students that are kind of in the year before a school-to-school transition where there's nothing more in the building they're in, and accessing the next thing would mean transportation, which is hard to accomplish and expensive. But those would be a handful of options that I would look at. There's a report that the Bell and Blank Center at the University of Iowa recently published that looks at a lot of different kinds of acceleration models, and the people behind that. We have a lot of different reports, so that might be a good resource to look at as well, for just exploring options.
I'm sorry. Do you, just, I got some great questions here. I know a lot of parents that come specifically for this presentation. Would you mind answering questions from, can you limit it to just 2 questions from the audience? If you're interested. Mr. Nelson?
Can you give us a thumbnail sketch of how, you know, a school district that is accelerating students, you know, at what point should they be making that decision? Do the students just to be differentiated in classroom, and the students should be accelerated beyond other grades? Give us an idea of how, under best practices, that should be working.
Okay. Yeah, some of that, you know, that decision is always about what's the best option of the options we have available to meet the needs of that particular student. So when you decide between, you know, do we try to support that student in sort of their, you know, among their age peers, or do we do acceleration, is to an extent based on how well differentiated what's available at their grade level is. But the IO acceleration scale, again, that I mentioned, has a very good predictive track record in terms of predicting which students would likely succeed in an accelerated environment. So we would look at that as a case-by-case basis. I will say that national research suggests that that's probably a vastly underutilized option in a lot of schools, particularly that can't do a lot at grade level. But again, I would always make that decision, you know, by looking at a student individually, and then thinking about, you know, if I think about, you know, the actual, you know, 8th grade setting that we can provide and the actual 7th grade setting that we would be able to provide, looking at that student as a whole, academically and developmentally, which of those 2 options is going to be, you know, the most appropriate, where we can most closely meet that student's needs.
So I understand that on an individual basis, but on a school district-wide basis, a school district of this size, how many students would you expect to see accelerated beyond their grade level?
Ever, or in any given year?
In any given year, yeah.
You know, I would say that, you know, students that are at or above about the 95th percentile, you know, on a good nationally normed grade level test would probably benefit from some kind of acceleration at some point in their academic career, whether or not that's a whole grade acceleration or acceleration in an individual subject area would depend on looking at their overall profile. So for example, if you had a student that was way, way high in math, but was you know, more like a typical student in reading or vice versa, that would be a student who would be a better candidate for acceleration in that individual subject area. But if you have a student that's off the charts in math and is well above, you know, grade level, you know, in reading, that's a student that it might be better to just allow to move on. But I would say in terms of grade acceleration, in terms of, you know, doing that at any time in the K-12 span, it's probably going to be 1%, or maybe even a little bit less than that if there's good programming available within grade level, and then probably another, you know, 10% in terms of subject acceleration, at least at some point in their academic career.
Thank you.
Do we have one last question from the audience? Okay. So, if you don't, one last question.
One last question.
So, and this is for actually both you and Dr. Ward, you can also chime in. Do you think that we should have something at the junior high school level in terms of a gifted or a more formalized program? Do we need something more at our junior high school that mimics what we have at our elementary schools, and so that the elementary school program translates into something a little bit more substantial at our junior high school?
I would definitely look at the continuity of the program again, because we know that it's not just having a good experience one year, but having that long-term sequence that really changes the trajectory. What the structure of that looks like should depend a little bit about what the rest of the structure at junior high looks like. There are a lot of different ways that you can configure a program to provide the curriculum, but kind of what I would say the non-negotiables would be is that through some setting you do provide access to that significantly advanced content, and then you provide at least some opportunities for those advanced students to be able to experience that content with a group of peers that shares that interest and will be able to push and challenge those students, whether that's in a full day program or whether you're doing things in individual subject areas. There are a lot of different ways that you can do that if the concept is there and the support for the teacher is there.
Well, thank you very much. That certainly has been informative, and I think that you've given us a lot of avenues as we explore and develop our gifted program and further enrich our students. And again, thank you for answering questions and helping to illuminate.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Yes.
This is really cool. With all of the information that you have on the policy, when would we expect to see this translated to or the next step? Is that something?
I'm looking at around this county, again, waiting for our new curriculum person, this hire is just looking person. Preliminary, we're taking this information.
Okay. All right, next up on the agenda, we have the concussion oversight team. Dr. Vespa.
Yes, we have a policy that will be coming up here shortly, but basically for the concussion policy, we have to establish a team. And I have Ms. Kanawa, I know that you are here. Would you please just give a quick briefing of this so that our Board of Education knows at our board meeting, there'll be a recommendation of points.
Good evening. As you're aware, we have a student athlete concussion and head injury policy. And I'd just like to briefly review the highlights and identify our concussion oversight team. The intention of the Youth Sports Concussion Safety Act is to ensure that any student with a concussion is removed from play, where they receive medical attention, and they're allowed to rest cognitively and physically. Promote the brain rest that's needed in order for them to return to play and return to learn. In order for this to happen, we have to educate our coaches, our staff, our parents, and students on the policy, concussion symptoms, and concussion management. Educational information on concussions will be provided to coaches, staff, parents, and student athletes. Student athletes and their parents will be given additional information which must be signed and returned prior to participation in any practice or game. Coaches must complete a 2-hour IESA approved concussion program by September 1st, 2016. Our concussion oversight team members are the Parker Assistant Principal Bruce Naminsky, Dean Deborah Dunwoody, Coach PE teacher Ryan Gerlacki, Nurse Carla Alexander Grant, and myself. I will serve as the concussion oversight case manager and will be responsible for implementing and complying with the research-based return to learn protocol from Lurie Children's Hospital and return to play from the CDC. So in summary, if student shows any signs of concussion, they will be removed from practice, receive emergency care, and then return to learn. And just finally, I want to note that the concussion management program will apply to all students in the district, not just student athletes.
Thank you, Ms. Kanawa. So at our next board meeting, we will policy together as well, but there will be the appointment resolution of the people that were just previously mentioned.
I just want, now, am I pronouncing that right? Now, I'm saying, just real quick, is part of that when the kids sign up for the sports and the parents will have to sign off on the concussion policy as well and be educated on that?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, I couldn't see it. We had a couple things come up in junior high. I wasn't sure if I saw that for this year for activities for next year.
So there'll be no about policy as well as sign off on it.
Okay, thanks.
Questions? Yeah.
Thank you so much. You know how important that is.
I do.
Although this is, I know you said for the whole district, this is specific to the junior high, and you'll continue that education with all staff in the elementary schools for playground and phys ed concussions that might occur in those settings.
Right, all of our staff will, through our GCN training that they do at the beginning of the school year, that will be one of the components of their training, concussions.
Okay.
So that'll be for all staff in the district.
Great, and glad to see us taking that seriously, and that the students' recovery time is considered in that, because it can be extensive, and missing school can be a large part of that. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much also. Next on the agenda, we have the SB 100 update. Dr. Jessica?
Thank you. We have a PowerPoint for the Senate Bill 100 update, which will be enacted next year officially on September 15, 2016. We're going to give you an update on this and a little bit of information. I've had my team work on this, and my team was Dr. Lork, and Mr. Kennedy, Dr. Rosen, and Ms. Demetrovitz. So thank you very much. I'll give an introductory to this, and then we'll split it off so that they can present. Mr. Kennedy will not be presenting on this because he's got a big presentation after this one. So with that being said, I want the Board of Education to know as well, we've met with Governor State University. We're going to be working with their Restorative Justice Department, and they're creating a plan at this point to assist with getting some information, and there's going to be some action, research, and data that will be involved with this. We're meeting with them on June 13th. One of the gentlemen, and I haven't seen him here, Mr. Merrick, are you here? He didn't make it this evening, but he's actually a resident of our school district, and he's going to be working closely with us as well. So we have some things lined up for next year, especially at our junior high level, that we'll be addressing. This year, we've started implementing Senate Bill 100 already with our within our staff. You'll see some of that information here. It is a paradigm shift in how I was disciplined as a student, and it is more about what we want to do as a school district: keep children in school. We want to educate children, and we want to be able to have different types of interventions to assist our children so that we can help them to be successful adults. In addition to the Senate Bill 100, though, we will have balanced discipline. Balanced discipline is traditional discipline, is what we've used in the past. The other part is the restorative justice discipline, and that is where we're trying to correct and work with our families, and work with our community members, and especially work with the children. So with that being said, if you could go to the next slide. This is what the law states. Senate Bill 100, or Public Act 99-456, it becomes law on the 15th of September 2016. We're well on our way. We've had a lot of training take place. You'll learn about later on in this PowerPoint. We've had a lot of peer observations. We've had a study group. We've been working with different people as well. The law says this: among the many possible disciplinary interventions and consequences available to school officials, school exclusions, such as out-of-school suspensions and expulsions, are the most serious. To ensure the students are not excluded from schools unnecessarily, it is recommended that the school officials consider forms of non-exclusionary discipline prior to using out-of-school suspensions and expulsions. What that is saying is we should, depending on the severity of what the infraction was, we should help our students to understand and find different ways of correcting their behavior and give them a different experience in regards to a discipline. I've been to several meetings on this. We've gone to law conferences or seminars. We've talked to different legislators on this as well. And this is something that next year we're going to be charting the waters and getting through. It's going to be a lot of assistance from our staff, our administration, and especially our community supporting this. With that being said, I'm going to turn it over right now to Dr. Crozen.
Thank you, Dr. Duster, for kind of stage setting for us what Senate Bill 100 is and what it says coming out of the legislature. Really, it addresses some of the suspension and procedures that all school districts utilize, not just here in 161. So we're going to go ahead in this portion and just kind of walk you through what are going to be some of the procedural changes once this law takes into effect. As Dr. Duster said, we had the privilege of attending a law conference by Robin Schwartz. So the information that's being presented here is what was presented to us from that legal team. There are two types of suspensions that are utilized within school districts: the in-school suspension, the out-of-school suspension. In-school suspensions are not addressed, so all local policies remain into effect. And then our out-of-school suspensions and expulsions within this law are really divided into two different categories: 3 or less days, or 4 or more days in terms of an out-of-school suspension. And we'll kind of show you a little bit more of what the differences are within the length of suspensions and requirements within that. As Dr. Duster said, when we exclude a student from school, it's serious, and our goal is to have our students in school. That's what hopefully we want as educators, as a community, as learning communities to have our students in school with us. And so Robin Schwartz, again, in this graphic, talks a little bit about where those behaviors kind of fall in terms of this range, and those lower level behaviors, not that they are acceptable at all, and they certainly say that these are not acceptable behaviors within our schools and should be worked on and worked to kind of address those behaviors. But those lower levels are probably things that we should be using interventions for, that we're really working with the students on. And then as you get up towards the top of the thermometer, those are things that start to pose a safety risk. And you see within the law that it talks about going to those types of behaviors because there are substantial disruptions in the learning environment, to someone's safety, to the school community at large. So in the case of 3 days or less in an out-of-school suspension, they're to be used in cases of threat to school safety, for number one, or disruption to other students' learning opportunities out of the school law. They're to be determined by a case-by-case basis by the school board or its designee, which would be the superintendent, and school officials should make all reasonable efforts to resolve those threats and disruptions during that suspension time. In the case of 4 or more days for an out-of-school suspension, again, they pose a threat to the safety of other students, staff, or members of the school community. They substantially disrupt, impede, or interfere with the operations of the school. Again, they're determined on a case-by-case basis by the superintendent. Appropriate and available behavioral and disciplinary interventions have been exhausted by the school officials before they go to that move. And school officials, again, need to make all reasonable efforts to resolve those threats and disruptions during the length of that suspension. The procedure for more than 4 days, 4 days out of school suspension, support services must be made available during that suspension, and that varies on a case-by-case basis. It's always been kind of special education law that if the student is having out-of-school suspension, that services continue during that. But also, if we're going to put some supports in for gen ed students, some services, what those look like. The law is a little vague in that regard, but We also need to make sure that there's a re-engagement policy upon completion of a suspension, that we're giving kids tools to come back from a suspension so that we don't have repeat offenders, and that they're understanding the seriousness of the suspension and how they're being reintroduced back into the academic and learning environment. And then we need to make sure that there is an opportunity to make up academic work for all suspensions. That includes bus suspensions. If the student cannot get to school because of a bus suspension, they are given the opportunity to make up that academic work. Some procedural changes, again, in regards to the law. The law does state that school boards may not institute a zero tolerance policy in its disciplinary code. In terms of notices to parents, all notices must include the act of gross misconduct, the reason for the suspension, and if it's 4 or more day out of school suspension, what supports are made available for that student. If a review by the parent is requested of the suspension, if it's a 3-day or less, all that documentation needs to be in there except for supports that are available, because those are not required in a 3-day or less out of school suspension. In a 4-day or out of school suspension, all that documentation needs to be in there, plus what behavioral interventions need to be have been provided, and will continue to be provided. We've been very proactive through our MTSS process of putting some interventions into our curriculum, and also having tier 2 and tier 3 behavioral supports. That's what kind of Dr. Work will go a little bit more into detail about as we kind of talk about how this impacts what we currently already have in place from a curricular standpoint.
So Senate Bill 100 named specific people that we need to provide professional development to. The Board of Education is one, teachers, staff, and teacher, staff, and administration. And it is on classroom management, it is on justice system involvement, and it is also on adverse consequences that Dr. Rosen was referring to with those suspensions. So we listed here opportunities, as Dr. Rosen referred to, we have been proactive. So those are already occurring, as well as things that we have been planning as this law continues to roll out. So as Dr. Rosen also stated, we put a lot into our core curriculum and made sure through our MTSS process that we had the tiers. So students, we could make sure that we were responding to those students who weren't responding to our core curriculum. So we implemented second steps, and that is something that is case-unique with that consistent language and making sure all students have opportunities for that. This year, we started piloting the restorative justice practices. Serena Hills has been our primary school for a wider implementation, and as Serena has had success, we've been rolling that out at our elementary schools as well, with the circles and peer mediation and getting more in depth with that. As Dr. Brooks referred to, our executive curriculum committee has really been on the forefront and being proactive, making recommendations and doing research as to ways that we can continue to roll this out. This is just a copy of the instructional framework that shows how our behavior is thought of as well as academics as we plan for the kids, which is also something that Senate Bill 100 is saying, what is that totality of your program? And so that's something that we've had in place now for 3 years. Mr. Torres will take it over from here.
So just to review our mission and vision, we just want to be sure that what we're doing aligns with, what is occurring with Senate Bill 100. The mission of our district is to work to create a strong community of young learners in an environment that is safe, diverse, and challenging for all students. In a partnership with our community of stakeholders, our mission is to provide critical thinking as a necessary set of tools to help prepare students for high school, college, and beyond, to be a community of leaders who inspire global learning. So when we looked at that and we looked at the activities around how we were going to address Senate Bill 100, we have to certainly keep in mind what truly is our mission and vision of our district. So our shared social and emotional learning values provide a safe, respectful, and responsible learning environment, provide learning opportunities within discipline occurrences when and where appropriate. So we're looking at teaching discipline almost like a content area, learning, when there's incidents that occur, how can we, do some constructive cognitive instruction, how we can help kids develop and put tools in their tool belt in a sense, so that if situations come up again, that it is a learning process that occurs through that. Create input and communication from all stakeholders, and then provide all stakeholders with appropriate tools to support social and emotional learning above and beyond our school. So the home to school and school to home conversations that we have with parents and how we can support parents with children who may be at risk or have some other issues in the social and emotional realm. So there was a two-phase implementation rollout. So our first phase is that we would look at our board policy revisions that would align with our Senate Bill 100, our handbook alignment and adoption so that our language is clear to the Senate Bill law, and our activities certainly outline and say the things that we're going to do to address this. Our documents, notification letter revisions and alignment. Professional development, Dr. Work spoke to a little bit, to teachers and staff at Institute Day, school board member training obviously would be determined by the superintendent and the availability of the board. Community, information, educational opportunities. So we think that that's important, that the community certainly should be involved and understand what balanced discipline looks like and how to be certainly change agents in that process. Our handbook distribution will occur within the first 15 days of school. And again, the language would outline all of the things that we talked about in Senate Bill 100, and that stakeholder community review committee, which I think will be great because I think it'll give an opportunity for all stakeholders to come together, how we can look at discipline and how we can address this law successfully to create environments that are safe and conducive for all children. Phase 2 is review of phase 1, ongoing professional development. We've definitely felt our committee in the areas of adult competencies and cultural awareness. We would look at our data reviews, especially about those areas that align with our Swiss data and looking at trends and patterns with that. We will look at activities with restorative practices at Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3. Curriculum review of social emotional learning, that's our second step. Is there measurable impact on when we implement with fidelity? What does that look like on our students and for our students? And then a memo of understanding with our local law enforcement so we can work collaboratively with community-based opportunities to support our students.
The only thing I would add on that last part, the memo of understanding, we have agreements already with our law enforcement agency, and I spoke to the board attorney about that, and that's more for high school, something of that nature as far as liaison officers. And so that's something we'll have to review with phase 2.
Yes.
Question, what is the time frame on phase 1 again?
I don't believe that we established a time frame for phase 1
Phase 1 will start this fall.
this fall.
Okay, and then when would phase 2 kick in? Next fall. So
Year.
this is a 2-year outlay for
I would say
First
so.
year is addressing the law, and the second year is
I would say that the ongoing professional development. Yes.
There's a couple of questions and then one comment. In your phase 1 of you just told me this is next fall. I heard community members and education, and then I didn't see anything specifically around parents and their education. You know how we had, for iPads, a parent you had to sit through a presentation and sign off that you understood about all your obligations as far as iPad. I would say we take a pulse of our community and your parents that we really highly consider. Not just educating the parents, but talking to them back and forth so that there's a specific understanding about their part, the teacher's part, the student's part, and expectations around accountability and ownership. Because we don't want to get in a situation where we're doing what we're supposed to be doing, and then there is, hell and hot water is just going amok because people either don't understand it or feel like we're in the loop, trying to changes. So So that's just something, it's a statement, but it's, yeah. I saw community, I didn't see specific parent, and that is one stakeholder that should be pulled out and understood, because they are very key. So that was that question. And again, as much effort as we put around that iPad, because that was technology and money, we made them even sign off on it before they got it, so this is something that's serious. The second question around law enforcement, a memo of understanding around law enforcement. I know that they were, even at the junior high level, about how to engage students. We had, issues with if they had to come up there, how do you engage students in front of other students, you have law enforcement and not creating a greater tension. So just, I making sure that we're having that conversation. The last part is actually a comment, and I appreciate what we have to do when it comes to implementing this program or implementing this law. You have parents on one side, and I'm specifically, again, parent in junior high, but then also board member here in the Pulse of the Community, from this is too harsh, don't expel, what's going to happen, to another parent saying, but are you doing it at the expense of my child and their learning? So you really have this push and pull. So how, and I'll be very interested in support about how we do this, but I noticed in the law, there's a lot of discretion. They're losing words. We recommend that you consider. So this, and so you've got teachers here that are trying to manage their classrooms with this ambiguity. Thus, going into that next conversation we're going to have about steps about what's serious enough to be considered that and what's not, because you have instances of fighting that you may not say they're hurting somebody else, but it becomes the whole conversation at the dinner table, not what you did today, not the exciting stuff, but that fight that we saw in the hallway, and yet it is up there as one of those that should be something that we even consider for expulsion or suspension, and kids say, so I do appreciate where you are. There's not even a question around there, it's just, we're at that point, right? So there are questions, and there are a lot of different stakeholders that have a lot of different views about this, and how we implement this is going to be very critical.
I'm sure that you are, entirely focused on this, but just for the sake of saying it, I will say, in much in the way that the presenter on the gifted program had stressed, the continuity is so essential, and that means back and forth. That means everyone understanding the same thing. Having worked for a number of years with very disturbed children who were violent and had to actually, this is the last stop for them before permanent mental commitment or prison in many cases. The success was all based on continuity and very, very, very clear relationships and support. Everybody was on the exact same page. When they weren't, that's when kids fell off.
That was a behavior school?
Yes. Yes.
I did have an opportunity, this will be in my report later, but I did have an opportunity to attend a professional development for where the Senate Bill 100 stemmed from. It's a federal law that was passed, the school that was sued by and charged with discrimination by the Attorney General's office, the United States Attorney General's office was there, and the proponent of the bill, the federal bill was there, and I had the opportunity to sit in on that session. And the most important thing they said over and over again to us is that you must watch racial disparity. That was the biggest thing that they had to pay the most amount of money to the government for, because and you have to keep the data, because if you get attacked by a parent, you get questioned by the ACLU, you have to have your data down. They did not have data, so then the Attorney General's office created the data for them and showed them that 100% of the people who were receiving expulsions were African American or Mexican. The 100% of the students that were out of school on suspension were of color. And, they're sitting there, they had no defense because they had no data. So it's important for the team, the committee, to make sure you keep up with the data of how you are implementing discipline, not just by age or grade level, but by the sex of the student, because again, they were shown that it was more male than female. And it's not a joke. It's not parents. It's not about what the stakeholders want or don't want, or what their positions are. It's something that's mandatory. The government has said, we want kids in school, period. And that's what they were telling all the board members, we want kids in school, bottom line. We don't care about what you have to say about my child being at risk or whatever. The schools are required to come up with a program that keeps everybody safe, but keeps the kids in school. And we don't have, like they said, they took out that zero tolerance. Do not put zero tolerance in your law, and I can tell you, when you know how many times we were like, oh, zero tolerance, they had a weapon in school. Zero tolerance, that means they're automatically expelled. Zero, no, there's no such thing anymore. That doesn't exist. A kid has a weapon in school, deal with it. Figure out where to put that child to keep everybody else safe, but deal with it, because there's no zero tolerance here. You have you come up with all the other rules that he meant, all the other benchmarks and requirements for expulsion, then yes, of course, you come to the decision of expelling that child, but just simply having a weapon in school doesn't mean that child is expelled. And drugs, or all of the different things that we are accustomed to, or we've been accustomed to in saying zero tolerance.
Real quick, you have a good point. One of the things that a lot of firms really pushed on us was, what is the intent? What's the intent of the drugs? What's the intent of the weapon? Example, someone brings a knife to school. Was that something left in the backpack at the Boy Scouts, or was that something that they were going to cause harm? So those are the different types of questions that need to be asked, and the intent needs to be addressed.
And I think so that is, okay, just so, that, and I want to make sure I'm very clear about the comment I made. It is with that executive, that understanding that we got to do something, period. Where I go back to, which probably ends up being my mantra in every single conversation, is that the parents still need to be educated on it. Even if it is to that point, breathe it out and get over it.
And I didn't
But it
get
is
to
there,
your
so
points,
that's-
they did, they created, and they got actually a grant to create this, so it wasn't out of the school board money. There were so many stakeholders who jumped in, the community members who jumped in on this mandate for the schools to remain in school. They created not only a pamphlet, and you can see their product on the National School Board Association website for the conference. All the materials that that were given out, or they didn't actually hand out, they were given green. So no materials were handed out, everything was online, you can access that. And they have a book that is separate from the regular handbook, the student handbook. It's a discipline booklet. And the parent has to check off, like you said, and then initial the back page. And because they went through this with their child, they went through it themselves, and they understand what their responsibilities are. And I mean, I don't think we have to do something that elaborate. They have a humongous school district. And so I can imagine the difficulty that they might have in reaching, parent groups. We don't have that same thing, but maybe, still doing, sign off, that they have a sign off in there. And they have an individual booklet, and it's so kindergarten. I'm telling you, it's so kindergarten. Like, no one can say that it was too wordy and too involved that they didn't have time to read it. That, like that meter there, is like meter here, green at the bottom. So these are the infractions. This is what you can expect. And you understand that if your child is doing this, then this is what the result is going to be. And so, it was really good, and they did suggest a sign off.
Yeah, most of this one has got that common language that is, kind of learning. I think Mr. Freya's right about the consistency and relationship building and getting educated, all stakeholders educated, whatever it means is really important. I think that's.
So just so I'm clear, as well as if any audience members are needing clarity about this meter, I can't see what the different levels are saying. And so what's written in red versus what's written in green? I mean, so is possession of firearm automatic expulsion?
We have to look at the
But
intent.
gang activity is not? I mean, can you talk, I just need to know what's written in that meter, so I can see what constitutes as an expulsion versus having to do different types of intervention before you are expelled.
Red is most severe, green is least. And when you get to the possession of a firearm, for example, you'll want to know what the intent of that was through the due process. That's also, as far as the violence towards staff and student, you need to take a look at those, and then the decision is made on where the consequence needs to be.
So fining, for example, is not automatic suspension. In our,
It's up to us. It's up to us.
so,
It's just an example.
okay. So we could
It's total discretion.
there's a policy that says fighting could lead to expulsion, or the first infraction may not, but then you do some levels of intervention, and if it occurs again, I was trying to get an
Yeah, because they look at intent, which is the
What is
intensity
our-
and frequency of the behavior.
Yeah.
So I
So
think
what's
all
our
of those
research?
things individually, you have to look at that, and then I think you have to sit down and put your fact finding together and look at what's in the best interest of all the students. You know, it goes back to that mission and vision, our safety and the learning environment, but usually it's the intent, it's usually the intensity and frequency of the behavior.
Are there any more questions?
But it's subjective.
This might come back later in questions after the next item. So if it's okay with everybody, we move on to the next one.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you
One
very
of
much.
my subjective comments, because it was very subjective, is maybe despite my warrant suspension, maybe that one is.
I understand.
I don't know.
I agree. Next on the agenda, we have discipline presentation from Parker. Dr. Dresser.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Chairman, if you'll introduce your team to the presentation tonight, I appreciate it.
Yeah, myself and Ms. Camilleri from our deans at Parker are going to kind of get us going, and I think Mr. Novinsky is going to pop in here a little bit later. It's interesting, some of the dialogue we heard from some of the board members, because some of that are some of the things that we are experiencing at Parker, and some of the things that, we're seeing with our staff as we try to process through some of these things that have taken place. But in the presentation, what we have for you this evening is just kind of some macro data, if you will, about steps. And then once we get through the fourth quarter, we'll get into some more of that micro data, looking at, how does it work for, how it looks for, gender, how it looks for location, time of day, and other things of that nature. So we're going to look at the steps, some of the macro data, and then Ms. Camilleri is going to talk a little bit about restorative justice, part of the balance of discipline approach that Dr. Duster referred to earlier. She's doing a lot of work with that, and we've been doing some things, particularly with our 6th grade team. We're going to look at just some general data as far as where are we at this year as compared to the last 4 years, kind of looking at some longitudinal data as far as that's concerned, and then going forward, some of the things that we're in the process of implementing, and some things that we would like to implement in the future. So, without further ado, here is just some, like I said, some macro data, looking at the steps, and just to kind of do a Reader's Digest refresher here for our board members and for people in our audience. The reason we put the steps in place is we're looking for a way for our staff to still be able to deal with classroom management issues without it having to become an office referral going to that point. There was dialogue that I had with Homewood Flossmoor High School as far as some of the things they were doing there. At Homewood Flossmoor High School, they have where students get a certain number of points for particular infractions, and those points will automatically result in a particular consequence. And that's not something we were comfortable doing, and it's not something that under the new Senate bill will be really permissible, where you can't have a specific consequence. We have to look at things, subjective as it may be, kind of on a case-by-case basis. So anyway, when a student gets a step 1 or a 2, it just results in a warning. First one is a warning to the student, second one is a warning and a phone call home. Once it gets to steps 3 and 4, it becomes detentions. It's still not an office referral at that point. And then when it gets to step 5, it becomes an office referral, and then those are dealt with on a case-by-case basis. Ms. Camilleri deals with 6th grade and a portion of 7th grade, and our other dean, Ms. Emily, she deals with 7th grade and 8th grade as well. So if you take a look at here in the bottom, we have that's just a total population of students that we have per grade level. If we start there with 6th grade, so roughly a little over a third of our 6th grade students have received a step, and this is through 3rd quarter. If you look at the next bar there, 11% of the students have gotten to a step 3 phase, which would result in a detention. And then 3% of our students have gotten to a step 5, which results in an office referral, but that could result in a multitude of consequences. It could be detentions, it could just be a conference, it could be a variety of different things. 7th grade, you can see the numbers there, be a little bit higher for students as far as step 1, 3, and 5, and then 8th grade as well. So the thing, you kind of always hear, a phrase that's thrown out pretty frequently, 90% of our kids are great kids. And if you look here, when you're getting to the referral phase, which then results generally in, like I said, not all the time, but can result in harsher consequences, Saturday schools, in schools, if you will. No matter what grade level you're at, you're under 10%. This is looking at the number of students who received the step, not the total population per grade level. So in 6th grade, we had 100 students who received a step through 3rd quarter. Of those 100 students, 29 of them got to step 3, and then 9% of them got to step 5. So if you look overall, the majority of our students are not even getting to those higher levels of steps. Once students have received steps, as you can see, as you would hope, it would gradually decrease as the consequences increase. This is looking at areas where steps have been issued. As you can see, this is lunchroom. The steps are broken down into different categories. One of them is lunchroom behavior. The next one is disrespect, insubordination, defiance. You can see the different grade levels, the amount of steps that have been issued. Tardy to class, and I'll talk a little bit more about this later on when we get to some suggestions that have been given to us by staff. We have some staff feedback, we have some parental feedback, we have student feedback as well. Hallway behavior. Disruptive conduct. And keep in mind, remember, this doesn't replace the good old-fashioned verbal warnings. Students give staff gives students opportunities. Hey, quit doing that. Please put that away, whatever the case may be, before a step is issued. But beforehand, generally, you had verbal warnings, and your next recourse at that point was to just issue a detention or issue a referral. This is trying to bridge that gap, much like you see kind of in the elementary schools where you have, the student has, they might have yellow and then they go to red, that type of scenario. Inappropriate physical contact, this would be of a non-major nature. This would not include fighting. Okay, and some feedback we've gotten from teachers, some of the positive. Kids are aware of the process. They know what it is. It's universal. It goes across all 3 grade levels. Students understand the progression. They're given the opportunity that, the first misstep or the first poor choice, if you will, doesn't result in a severe consequence. Majority of students and staff feel are receptive to the process we have in place. In their phone calls home, because they're calling home when students receive a 2nd, 3rd step, The parents are aware, they're being supportive. Parents are glad they're hearing things early. You know, they're getting a call with that second step. The student hasn't received any consequence, so they're appreciative that if it's a chronic behavior or behavior that's manifesting itself across the school day, that they're hearing about it before, you know, a detention or some other traditional consequences given, and that teachers appreciate the fact that there's a communication aspect to the system. Some fine tuning, just basically that the differential between steps and a referral. You know, when is it something that we will give a student a step for, or when is it something that now may require a referral? You know, it might be a behavior that we would consider to be maybe minor in the grand scheme of things, but if it's something that's repetitive, you know, something that's occurring frequently either within that one classroom or throughout the school day. Tardy removal, and that's something that I think, you know, one thing that the staff at Parker, I you know, give them a little bit of kudos, there's a number of them here, they've been very flexible this year. I mean, this is my first year in the district, I'm still trying to figure things out, and they've been very open to, you know, tweaking things along the way. And so we are very reflective. I have parents call me all the time, asking me to reconsider or thinking things, and we've changed a few things along that way. And so one of the things I think for next year is pulling the tardies out of there, so the tardies don't move students progressively, and that will be dealt with as its own entity. And just reinforcement with students that the warnings are over. You know, the first two are warnings. You know, we just need to make sure that our students are clear that once we get beyond that point that, you know, it will result in some consequences. Here's some feedback from students. These are 25, these are random, I shouldn't say random students. We tried to pick students from a variety of different backgrounds, students who have received steps, students who have not received steps. And so we asked them a series of questions, and there were some general themes that came out of there. The first question was, do they understand it? For the most part, yes. There were two who said no, but one was, she's like, well, I've never got one, so I don't know how it works. The next one is what's good about it. It teaches kids discipline. This is coming from the mouth of babes, if you will. And it gives you more than one chance to fix yourself. So they see the students aren't at their first misstep, you know, not given a chance to correct the behavior. So what can be improved? Teacher consistency. And that's something that, you know, I need to work as one of the building leaders, as well as my team, just trying to continue to do some professional development with that. You know, and that's something that probably, if you recall when you were in school, I know when I was in school, you go from classroom to classroom, and, you know, our teachers are not automatons, they're people, and everyone has different kind of levels of acceptedness in their classrooms. So that's one thing that we just want to try to work through. And then some of the students said there were too many steps. Teachers were giving them out, and then other students said that the steps were not severe enough. So that was some feedback from them. Parent feedback, they like the increased communication as much as the teachers pointed out. They like that it gives students a chance to correct their behavior and that there's clearly defined expectations for the students. Areas of concern, teacher consistency, much, you know, like the students said. And then the interesting thing, and I think it was, Ms. Harrell brought this up, kind of, I've had parents that have said that the step system is too punitive. The kids, bless you, that, you know, they do one thing wrong, they're being hammered with steps. And then I get other parents saying the step thing is too lenient, it's giving kids too many chances, kids are able to do too much. And that's, you know, kind of going into some of the other, you know, things that have been talked about lately. And I'm not immune to it, and we'll look at the data here in a little bit. But with the fighting, you know, that's something that is kind of, it's been spread throughout the community, and some things are not entirely accurate, there, but I get calls from parents, you know, concerned that we're not holding the kids accountable enough. And then the next day I'll get a call saying that we are, you know, they're just kids, we're doing this. You know, it's kind of like I kind of put it in a little bit of a story, if you will. If you call a parent and say, you know, Johnny did this at school today, he, you know, hit this, he punched his kid, or don't even say that, just say a student did this. Well, what do you think should happen? Well, that student should be suspended from school. Okay, I just want to let you know your son will be suspended for 3 days. I said, well, no, wait a minute. You know, it's one of those things where, you know, they want traditional harsh consequences, but then if it hits a little bit closer to home, then maybe we need to reevaluate what we're doing. So that's kind of a struggle, a balance that we're trying to work through currently at Parker right now. But that brings us to the balanced discipline, you know, the traditional consequences, restorative practices. I don't know truly if the scale is balanced quite yet. We have someone who's working diligently on that right now, so I'll turn that over to Ms. Campbell.
So this year, we have begun building our restorative justice program at the junior high. Basically, it's considered an intervention. It's also us trying to, number one, balance our traditional approach to discipline with the restorative practices and building in more of discipline based to where students are forced to repair the harm and to really reflect on what they have done and to make the consequences more meaningful to the student. Our restorative justice program involves, as we speak now, talking circles, restorative chats, peer jury, merit program, and then our student discipline, which I know we'll talk about more later, but that we have built in a community service piece as well as a mandatory parent meeting piece, as well as our traditional practices already. Okay, talking circles. Talking circles help to build a supportive classroom environment. We have just finished our meeting with fifth grade teams at the elementary schools, and a lot of the elementary schools are already using talking circles in their classrooms. So we'd like to continue that practice at the junior high. Basically, the students through talking circles, the students learn the values of respect, responsibility, sharing, active listening, confidentiality, and these are all things that we see as life skills. And I would like for them to take place once a week, along with the SEL lesson in conjunction with that, and that would be good for our junior high moving forward with talking circles. Talking circles, where we are right now, we've received some training in this month of May for our sixth grade team. We will pilot this with the sixth grade next school year. Some of the schedule changes that we're talking about for next year with combining the homeroom with that first period class, so your homeroom will also be your first period class, will allow for the circles to take place once a week. Circles may be called for anything, and that's why we call them talking circles, because they can be called for celebrations, topics that students want to discuss, and of course discipline. Restorative chats. This is also an independent preventative measure. For students, some of our students come into the school upset. Maybe something happened the night before or something happened over the weekend. And basically it involves us getting a quick check of where our students are in the morning. And I know some of the elementary schools already use this as well. So basically the teachers can use thumbs up, thumbs down, how are you feeling today? You can use a scale, 1 through 5, maybe a 1, okay, where are you at today? A 1 would be, I'm not doing so well. A 5 would be, I'm great. And so students that are not doing okay, we would like to have one-on-one restorative chats with them, either with the deans, school psychologists, social workers, the teacher, if they're available at that time, just so that you're able to talk with them and sort of work things out before they fester into larger problems throughout the school day. So examples of meeting with that child would be, we're asking them, what happened? How can I help you? And how can we move forward? Peer juries is also another preventative measure that we have at the junior high. It's interventions for students that are having a disagreement. And again, so it does not fester throughout the school day, a problem. Students are referred to the peer jury through the dean's office. During the peer jury sessions, the participants will be given the chance to talk out their disagreement. They will be provided with meaningful feedback from the peer jurors and advice. The peer jurors do not determine, though, whether you're guilty, whether you're innocent. They also create an agreement for them to sign, basically talking about what will occur and what happened during the discussions. Now, our peer juries, this is our peer jury as it stands right now. It's 8th grade PBIS student leaders. They received a week of training in February of 2016, which involved conflict management, problem solving, and active listening skills. And again, we're piloting this with our 6th and 7th grade students, and it's for, again, peer conflicts. Now, I'd like to talk about our merit program at the junior high. These are some pictures of students in our merit program, and basically what the merit program is it gives the students a chance that have earned the merits through the discipline, things that they've done throughout the school day. It gives them a chance to earn back that time and earn merits. And so they would have to earn merits, the students have to volunteer either during the school day, after school, or on the weekend. And they can volunteer anytime, any place they would like to. We've had students volunteer in homeless shelters at Respond Now, the South Suburban Humane Society. They have volunteered after school. We have students cleaning the school and working with our custodial staff. They also volunteered during the school day. We had students buddy up with the Read 180 students and be a peer reader. Also, they have given peer tutoring service to our instructional room. Also working with social workers and creating bulletin boards and doing a number of things throughout the school to basically give back and repair the harm that they have done.
Our staff's been very open to providing some, suggestions and different ways that students can do that. So these are some of the things that, Mr. Naminsky's going to bring up some more things later on going forward, but in the future plans, obviously we're going to analyze the data, we're going to take a look at it, and we're going to make revisions as necessary. None of us is saying that it's a perfect program, that we have discipline down to a science, and that's how we grow stronger, that's how we get better, is by looking at, what we have in place, where some areas for improvement. One of the things we're definitely going to focus on next year, and this is from feedback from staff and just from our own observations, is we need to increase our focus on the PBIS, focusing more on the positives for our kids and the social emotional needs of our students. We're going to have the social workers be more actively involved with the classrooms, providing more fidelity to our second step program. And just outside of that, in the 6th grade, we're going to have the talking circles, but in 7th and 8th grade, we want our social workers on a rotational basis to check in during those enrichment times, to have dialogue with the students, to see how they're feeling and to work through any conflicts or to celebrate things as well. Parental involvement and a couple of it was ironic, Mr. Naminsky and I were, and Mr. Brzezinski as well, were talking about, we need to get parents involved more than 2 of our 8th grade staff members. One of them is here right now. She didn't know I was doing this, but she didn't copyright it, so I think I'm okay. Came up with some ideas for next year, targeting fathers. So, Ms. Perino, if you click on that, another little thing should come up, and then if you click on that, or just pop right up, great. This is called the Solution Squad, Solution or Pollution. You can, if you want to go ahead and just click on the next.
Okay.
It's talking about getting fathers involved here, explain some expectations, and this is very much in the preliminary stages, to get some volunteers to come in. We had a number of fathers already reach out, saying that, if there's anything I could ever do or to get in there, we need to take advantage of that. just to get them in there. We don't want it to be where they're in there necessarily even lecturing to the kids, if you will, some ideas there, after school playing board games with the kids, leading book discussions, or for some of our students that, either don't have a male influence in their life or don't have a positive male influence in their life, to provide that opportunity within the, in the safety of the confines of Parker. And then this is just kind of the who, what, where, when type of thing. And just give them schedules ahead of time. Give them a T-shirt, something at Parker, parent partner. So that's an alliteration, I think, right? Like people. Where they can just be in the hallways, just be a presence in the school. I think would be a very positive thing for our kids. So thank you for Ms. Peacock and Ms. Walsh who came up with that.
I was, Mr. Queen, I don't, just because I want to let them pass. Solution or pollution? What's this? I got the solution. What's the solution or pollution?
So we have a lot of pollution when fights happen and chatter gets going in the community, in the schools, and that's poisonous. It affects the environment. We're tired of pollution. We want a solution. And we know we don't have any more money, so why not get some males in the community to volunteer who are already vested and come on in our schools and just be visible. That visibility makes a world of difference.
I might add to that very briefly, that I think that you are onto something, and that I would also stress that the school is just a stopping point for these kids' microculture. They come from arguments from the previous week, and at Quickie Marts or at the library, they carry on these arguments. And it's not just a case of, okay, I'll see you tomorrow. It's something that it really does have to be inclusive of everybody, the entire community.
Absolutely. And then at-risk mentoring, identifying some of our students who are coming into our building from our feeder elementary schools and pairing them up with some of our 8th grade students to kind of show them the ropes, show them the way things should be at Parker and so forth. The next slide here, it's before I get to it, as I pointed out before, the thing I've been hearing, the thing that I know it's in the blogs and everything is the fighting at Parker. And I thought, geez, it must really, no fights are, fighting is not acceptable. School should be a safe place, and we all truly believe that. But I thought, is the discipline is it out of hand this year? So Mr. Naminsky he went into Swiss, pulled the data, and this is where we currently are. This is a 4-year trend. If you could look at, you start in the 12-13 school year. The first line at the top is the total referrals received. And that's projected, that's taking into account, we have, I think, 8 school days left. We would, if we maintain the pace we were currently at, we would have 1,166 referrals. If you look at that, it's down 100 referrals from the previous year. And I don't know what happened in 12-13, but there were quite a few there. So there's been, if you can see a trend over the past 4 years, you've seen a decline in referrals. Fighting is actually down from last year. Granted, we have 8 school days left. So looking at that rate, if we had 1 every day the last few days of school, we would equal last year. But fighting is down from last year. Disrespect is down from last year as well. Abusive language is down, and then some of our major, categories they're all lumped together: tobacco, drugs, weapons, or combustibles. We've had 1 incident this year. So I'll turn this over to Mr. Naminsky here, but the one thing that it's still not where we want it to be. Obviously, the staff has worked very hard. They've been extremely proactive, being in the hallways, trying to form those relationships with kids. But for some reason, things are getting out in the community. You know, I got a call a couple weeks ago that someone heard somebody got stabbed at Parker. No one was stabbed at Parker. Things like this. So we need to, that's something that we need to try to work on, is trying to not fan those flames and try to find ways to effectively, obviously we need to preserve the sanctity of the privacy of students. I mean, we can't announce what particular students did or what their consequences were. But we need to make sure we're having that open dialogue, because, you know, those type of unsubstantiated rumors hurt all of us. You know, they hurt, you know, our students who are there. They hurt our staff who's worked hard to make, you know, Parker a great place to be, and it hurts the community as a whole. So that's something that, you know, going forward we need to work together to try to combat. So.
Yeah, I want to say something. I understand statistics. First of all, let me say this. Discipline starts at home. We all know that. So we cannot put the onus on the school. So let me say that to you, first of all. Secondly, when I look at statistics, I mean, we can take a look at this and I can tell you that I'm not even sure that you're aware of all the fights that are taking place in the school. And let me go into this, just to delve into it a little bit deeper. And I'll use, unfortunately, I'll say Chicago. Chicago reported crime down, and the statistics showed, yet we continue to see homicides on the news. So we knew with the media, we can blame it on the media. And I also know, by coming from a family, a big family of Chicago police officers, lieutenants, every homicide is not reported in the news. So therefore, we're not seeing all of the statistics. I kind of get a little disturbed when I hear it being said that what's in the blog, what you're hearing is not true. No, I'm not there, and I'm not there every day, but my daughter is. And she's not one of those kids that stay in trouble, fortunately. And when I'm in the store, and I'm being stopped by parents who are saying, why are all these fights breaking out? And they may have their son and daughter, they tell her what happened. Not that I can remedy any of that, but I think I don't want it to be downplayed. You know, I'm looking at the numbers, and that's fine, and we know what's been reported, but I do know and I believe, and my daughter is not one to do a lot of talking. She probably was the number 2 on there who said, I don't know what it is. I know I never had one. But what I'm really trying to say is, we have kids that are in these schools. Now, you got some kids that are going to tell some tall stories. And you got some kids who don't speak very much, but when they do speak, I suggest we listen. And I'm a little hesitant to believe that we don't have an issue there with fighting. Now, I'm not going to blame you. I told you discipline starts at home. And I'm going to say that no matter what, because I'm from the old school. And I also believe that we don't have all the answers, but we need a presence. And these young men, these men coming in this school may help, because see, back in the day, everybody was out. All of the staff was out, everybody, and then, of course, we knew times were different, where discipline, because we even had disciplinarians who could put their hands on kids, but we know that's not acceptable today. So the presence of the men, I really do think that that is an excellent point. But I also am trying to figure out, how are these fights breaking out? And, you know, just because it's not on TV don't mean that it ain't happening. Now, I want you to know that too.
Yes.
I know that too. But we want to stop it before it gets to that point. So what I'm really trying to say is, I think we do have some, and we got something, because see, you know, where there's smoke, there's a fire. And I don't believe, now I'm not gonna get into the stabbing thing because I didn't hear about that. But I believe we got some issues that need to be addressed. Now, how we partner to do that, again, I will still say discipline starts at home. But I think we got some issues going on there at Parker. And yeah, data does show, we got a lot of things that have happened through the years and maybe some things are declining. But we got some things that I think that need to be addressed in this, the men coming into the school, I think will be a very positive, thing. But I don't want that to be downplayed because I've heard it from more than a number of students. And I'm gonna tell you, when my daughter don't speak much, not much at all, because you know, she knows I'm one of the type of parent, I'm not gonna tell my mama that. But when she does tell me there's a concern, and there's a concern for kids and their safety, because these things are breaking out and there's nobody around to stop this. So I'm a little alarmed when you know, when we try to downplay this. Sure, we don't want any negativity. I don't want any, I live in this district too. But I do want to get a handle of what's happening, and I think that again, I'm going to say it again, the men being present, that stops, that might put a stop to a lot of things, but we need to have staff. And back in the day, everybody, all hands were on deck.
Yeah, and we've seen, and we're not putting our heads in the sand, and we're not saying there's, you know, please don't misinterpret that there's not an issue. I wouldn't have brought it up if it wasn't a concern. But we've seen, you know, unfortunately, we've seen some incidents where there's been staff members literally right there, and students have ran past them and went after other students.
Oh, yeah.
That's actually a bigger problem.
Yeah, gotcha.
I'm gonna say that's like a red flag, and I think that what we really need to address, and I'm gonna make a recommendation later, is that we really look at what are the causes of this, and how can we shape the environment so that's really minimized. But I'm gonna make the suggestion that we continue with our presentation.
Okay.
Yeah, we have more questions later.
All right, sounds good.
This one's the arrow, right arrow.
There we go. Some of the things is something we just, I'm going to try to condense in a little acronym, a little crude acronym that I put together over the weekend, so I apologize if it is crude. It was off the top of my head, but I thought it was appropriate. You've got a lot of data tonight, you've got a lot of information, you've heard a lot of programs, you've heard a lot of ideas. How can Parker partner with our community, partner with our staff, and partner with our students to kind of bring this all together? In my opinion, it revolves around preparing, it revolves around educating, it revolves around addressing, and then it revolves around rewarding. Preparing, what do we need to do to prepare? We know that altercations are going to happen in a public school of 900 students. It's inevitable. It makes us sick when it happens, but we know that when it happens, we need to say our staff is prepared. How are we prepared? Continue to increase our staff supervision in the hallways, in our PE areas, in our lunchroom, in our outdoors. Love to see that we have 15, 20 teachers here tonight, because I will tell you, if you come down our hallways during passing period anytime, you will see each and every one of these teachers standing outside their doors, room after room after room after room. That makes a difference. And the administrative team looked at that and said, you know what, we asked our staff to do that. Why can't we get off the phone when that bell rings? Why can't we tell a parent, you know what, I need to step out in the hallway for 2 minutes. We need to echo that. So our administrative staff has done everything we can to make sure that we are out in the front lines too, that we are around the hallways on those passing periods too. The kids pick up on that. We've talked about dividing up the lunchroom next year. If you've ever been in our MUR when there is lunch with about 300 kids, there's a lot of kids in there, there's a lot of noise, it is crowded. We've got a nice little south gym right next door to us that we can take 8 tables, put 100 kids over there, divide up our homerooms, and really have a nice solution for our lunchrooms. We do have a lot of issues that take place in our lunchroom because of the congestion. We're looking at kind of spreading kids out in that congested area. Our lunchtime procedures, our 7th grade teachers graciously, because it fit into their schedule, took it upon themselves to begin to take their kids from homeroom, or from their class, go to their locker, take them from their homeroom, and walk them down to the lunchroom. You may say, well, that sounds a little elementary. Well, you know what? Kids love it, and the teachers love it. There's nothing wrong with the 7th grade staff taking down their 7th grade students, walking down to the lunchroom. It's orderly. It gets kids through a very rough transition sometimes. Can't wait to get to lunch, can't wait to socialize. It's been a really nice experiment that we've seen. We'd like to expand that to other grade levels next year. Reducing PE class size, we have a lot of issues that take place in PE because frankly, when you've got 35 kids on one side of the gym and another 35 kids on the other side of the gym, again, you've got a lot of congestion. Last board meeting, the board graciously allowed us to hire another PE teacher. That's going to help us to get those class sizes down to the upper 20s and around 30, and that is exponentially going to help us, not just in PE, but also in the locker room where, again, you've got a lot of congestion. You've got kids coming in who are just off a basketball game and somebody watched somebody's shot and somebody thinks they're better, and that's how those heated arguments get started. We're going to have more supervision, but we're going to have less students involved. Mr. Kennedy had a great idea about taking first hour next year and just kind of combining it into our homeroom time. It's something we're tinkering about. That's just one less transition in the morning. You come in, you get your announcements, and you go right into class time in that first period. There's some logistical things we need to work on and look at that, but it would be another idea of limiting the transitions in our building. And we understand that to prepare, we have to collaborate with not just our local school districts. I meet with 9, 10 school districts each month for athletic sports meeting, and we bounce ideas off each other. You know, Colin Powell, what's going on at your school? Is there a strategy that you've used? James Hart, what are you guys doing to work with cell phones? What are you doing to limit fights? We need to do that more with our local school districts. They've got some great ideas that we need to benefit from. Look to HF for some strategies. Most of our kids go to HF and they can provide us with the resources we need, and we need to continue to examine our current practices. This all falls under the umbrella of preparing. Now, once we've prepared, we need to educate, and I think that this one probably is the key. We need to educate you, the school board. We need to educate our parents in the community. We need to educate our staff and our students, and there are numerous ways that we can do that. We started a bully hotline this year that really kind of took off in the beginning of the year, and frankly, in all honesty, we got away from it a little bit. We need to go back to that. We need to have an avenue that if a student is being picked on, and that conflict is rising, and they're getting angry, they're getting upset, they can anonymously go and they can voice their concern, or a friend can voice their concern, and we can mediate and get into that situation before it rises to a physical altercation. We're looking at speakers for conflict management for students and for parents. I have spoken with many parents who have had students who have been involved in physical altercations, and I'm sorry to say, it's a product of some families. Those families have said, well, I told Johnny that if someone walks down the hall and someone looks at him, he's got every right to pop that kid. I have had that told to me. I have had students tell that to me. We need to give our students the tools they need to manage their conflict effectively. But as you said, Mrs. Huckabee, we need to reinforce this at home. We need to make sure that this is something they are learning at home, they are bringing into school, and it touches the whole situation. We have coffees. Each one of our buildings has coffee for parents. One of those coffees next year, I talked with Mr. Kennedy. We simply want to bring people in and we want to get your feedback on some of the things that we are talking about right now. Parker Dance Group, I don't want to be redundant, it was an excellent idea by Tara Peacock, Tiffany Washington, very excited about moving forward with that. I recently put out an incentive response survey to our staff. About 40 of them have taken it. Some suggestions and ideas, not just about how we can respond to behavior, but as you're going to see in a little bit, how we can reward the students that are meeting our expectations. I still believe, and the data will back me up, that 90% of our students, by and large, are doing everything we ask them to do. We need to recognize them more than we do. We need to train staff in crisis intervention. Research studies show that when teachers know how to step into a situation that may be developing and how to kind of exacerbate that situation and put calm to it, less fights occur. We need to give our staff the tools to do that as well. Our sixth grade teachers are articulating with our fifth grade teachers and their students. We've gone over there to try to give them the lay of the land for what's going to happen when we get to Parker, and we need to continue to use that as an opportunity for fifth graders who are making that jump to the junior high. My idea is to promote a fight-free zone in our building, and that means if I've got to put 200 signs around our building that Parker is a fight-free zone and plaster it everywhere so that every time you go you see that and that message gets embedded, that's what I feel that we need to do. We need to promote that line of thinking. We need to put signs out what to do when you think you may be in a fight. When you think you're getting angry and you think you may haul off and punch that kid, you need to pause, you need to think, and you need to identify what could happen if you do that. We need to designate areas in our building that are safe zones. My office has been designated as a safe zone. If your daughter and another daughter and another girl came to me and said, you know what, I'm sick of her, I'm tired of her, and I'm going to smack her one of these moments, and they come in They can come in my office and they can verbally exchange what they need to exchange in a safe zone. They can get their hostilities out with a supervisor there. We can mediate that conflict and they can walk down shaking hands or hugging, knowing that they've moved on past that. We need to identify those safe zones to keep those fights away. Once things have happened though, and again, we don't want to stick our head in the sand, they will happen. We're hoping to limit them, we're hoping to reduce them. We need to address behavior. You've heard about consequences with Senate Bill 101. We need to expand consequences for fighting, including loss of privileges, opportunity to participate in extracurricular activity, community service, parent shadowing, and development of the PASS program. Some of our students, they get in a fight, they go home for a 2-day suspension, no learning takes place, they're on the computer, they're playing video games for 2 days, there's no parent in the house, there's absolutely no change in the behavior. It's almost like a vacation for them. We need to look at that practice. We need to see, is it effective for some students? Is it not effective for others? And we need to come up with alternatives to that. As Jen told you earlier, we need to expand our restorative practices, our talking circles, and our peer juries. And we had the benefit of Kate Wilson. I was able to sit in that with Mr. Kennedy and 6th grade teachers. Restorative Guru is a peace circle in action. We're going to pilot that in 6th grade next year. This is the one that often gets overlooked, and I wanted to finish on it. We focus on ending behaviors, we focus on consequencing behaviors, and we overlook the students that day after day after day show up, meet our expectations, go from one class to the next in 3 minutes or less, do their work, are respectful, are trustworthy, and make Parker what I still believe is a great school. And we overlook those, and we need to come up with ways to reward those students, to recognize those students for the great things they are doing. We need to reward our referral-free students quarterly. We need to have afternoon-free gyms and activity centers. When I taught at Parker before I became an administrator, this was kind of a hallmark. They have away from it, something that we can come back to. Staff is overwhelmingly in a survey indicate they would be interested in that. We need to reward fight-free grade levels with the fewest office referrals. It needs to be individual accountability for the students with a reward, but students, I firmly believe, need to be accountable to one another. If I'm sitting at a table and 2 of my friends are getting ready to get into it, I need to say, you know what? You do that, and it's not only going to hurt you, it's going to hurt us collectively. It needs to be a collective effort to bring that behavior down. We need to recognize a daily student of the day. I've asked Mr. Cannon if we can do this, and he's given me his blessing. I'd like the homerooms to rotate next year, and I'd like each homeroom to nominate 1 student a day. That student would be recognized on our announcements. That student would have a little blurb placed on the website. They would be our student of the day. And it's not just going to be the student who's got the straight A's, the 4.0, the shiny clothes, the smile, and everything. We need to recognize students who maybe started off the day wrong or started off the year wrong and have made the effort. I love baseball. Baseball's got an MVP, but baseball also has a most improved player each year. We need to recognize the students that don't have all the advantages that some of our students do and make sure that they are being recognized too. And with that would be an administrative phone call to that parent that day saying, your child was recommended for student of the day, and we just want to say thank you. And a student of the month quarter breakfast, I gotta get this past Mr. Kennedy, and I don't be sold on the idea, so I may have to take it over myself, and this is just kind of a recollection from the 1 year I spent at HF. Each quarter they would bring in a group of students that had excelled, had exceeded, but also had shown improvement in their studies, and they would have a quarter of the month breakfast, and it would be for the students, and it would be for their families. Forget about the good PR that is just good to recognize kids, and for kids to be recognized in front of their families, and for kids to be recognized in one another. We need to prepare for what's going to happen. We need to educate everyone. We need to address things when they do happen, and we need to reward frequently and constantly the students their behavior. So I just kind of wanted to summarize everything that had been said. You'll see this acronym around Parker next year. I need to come up with a nice little graphic design for the pair. I think we're headed in the right direction. We've got ways to go. We've got things we need to deal with. We've got a dedicated staff that turned out tonight who is out there every step of the way, who, as Mr. Kennedy said, is extremely flexible. We're working as a team. It's not perfect. We're getting where we need to be.
Questions? Yes, miss.
Thank you for the presentation. I have just a couple of things that I noted. The community service pieces for this committee or anybody who wants to announce it or talk about it. Community service, and just for NJHS, right? So community service is seen as a leadership building tool. But community service is kind of seen as a punishment if you do something wrong. So the messages are very different, and community service is something, service should be something, and there's so many studies out there that talk about when kids who are involved in service learn to understand about community more, and again, the harm piece doesn't come as much. You have a whole population of students who, it feels like unless you are top of the top or in trouble, that don't get that benefit of service, and I think that there's an opportunity to change a culture by getting kids before they get in trouble, and not just because they're excelling, because leadership development is critical.
We've actually thought, we've got so much stuff going on. I would like to, it'd be nice to at each grade level next year be able to do a community service, like you're saying, where it's not necessarily tied to you made mistakes, so now you need to do this to think about your actions, or yeah, I need hours, so I'm just gonna, I'm gonna do this. Where it is truly a community effort where we have our kids working together to benefit a variety of different people. So I think we all agree with you.
Yeah, there's no doubt that a community that's working unified on something is going to be they're going to be looking elsewhere. They're going to be looking away from themselves and towards a unified goal. And
It's kids and adults, but I mean, you get that.
Absolutely.
Okay, that piece of it. One of the pieces, I perked up a lot in the reward piece because what gets measured gets managed, what gets managed gets done, and we can keep measuring and having a big sign up there to talk about steps. That's where the focus is. The rewarding piece, that's great. I still feel that there's something missing from here because although we're rewarding behavior, there is still not anything in Parker that rewards those students who are on A and B honor roll or anything that has to do with grades. We still are in school, so holding up, just acknowledging that, it means something, and I'll give you an example, not just the honor roll piece, but the kids notice and love, Mr. Kennedy, I know you do these, I don't know if you turn them over, but the morning announcements. So they like to live for a little bit hearing about their name or their team if they did well that evening, or when you like, oh, well, they didn't quite make it, but they did their best, right? What they do notice is some inconsistencies about sometimes things aren't announced. They talk about even the track piece, right? So I don't know what happened, but they feel like, we almost didn't get a pep rally, or so those type of consistencies. The kids really are watching this piece of it, and it means a lot about getting the kids involved in something. And I know for sixth grade that track was big because they felt like there was nothing else they could do. So getting the kids involved, and I didn't see any more about that. I know you're doing things around that, so I wanted to make sure that was acknowledged.
In my last conversation with Tom Houlihan, he was over writing that fabulous story about Mr. Brzezinski. Off the record, I asked him about publishing our honor roll each chronicle, and you follow up with that.
Yeah, but I mean, not just HR Chronicle, not for out there. Being acknowledged in front of the other students means a big deal because they know they get acknowledged that the people who get straight A's all 3 years get acknowledged at graduation, but that's in front of their parent, not their peers. So that's a big piece of it. I think those were the things I had. You and I have talked about the more in-depth piece that I'm looking for on steps, so I'll hold that for right now, but
So I think one of my questions, concerns, I'm not quite sure how to categorize it, is about the environment, the climate. And so it's less about do we have more fights this year than we did last year, but more about what are the kids that are walking the halls every day feeling. And so, although I appreciate polling 25 kids, but you almost have 900 kids in the school. And so, is there a way to survey kids to really get a sense, if we really want to know how kids are feeling, and do they think the STEP program is working, or then having them do a survey that's anonymous, not pulling them to the office and saying, what do you feel about Parker today, I think is really, really important.
Yeah, Ms. Dunwoody and I, we're going through SMART training this year. That's one of our goals, is to create a student survey that we're going to do quarterly or trimesterly with the kids to kind of get a baseline at the beginning of the year, how we're feeling, how are we, and then checking again, okay, are we going up, are we going down? So yes, we agree that
Yeah, I mean, because I'd love to have my, finger on the pulse to really get a sense of how kids are thinking and feeling. Certainly what I hear is, some kids think, just like your variation in responses of whether it's working or it's not, kids have the exact same responses. What I do feel like, though, is overwhelmingly kids feel like it's actually pretty too easy
to get stuff. And you have your kids who don't ever get in trouble, who are walking around in fear because they are threatened with a step every day. So I just want to make sure that teachers are actually really trained and they're all looking. And I realize this is going back to some things are subjective, but if we have a system where we are passing out demerits, I think all teachers need to be on the same place in terms of what qualifies as one is not.
The other thing is, I thank you, Ms. Kennedy, adding this piece. I think I love the pair, and I think the vision of the pair and everything. But our whole conversation is centered around, it's almost as if students are both the problem and the solution. And I don't hear anything about diversity training, and maybe diversity training is an issue. Maybe that can be a part of the solution. What other tools can we give our teachers in their toolbox to actually help them make this program a little bit more successful next year?
Well, I think it goes even beyond, it's just relationship building. You know, that's a big component too that we've talked about. Trying to focus on diversity. I agree, we've had conversations with community members, we've had meetings with parents. You know, even Dr. Gus has been in a couple meetings with parents talking about getting people in to work with our staff on that. So there's a lot in the hopper. We're
I mean, I get it, there's a lot, it's all sort of trial and error, but I do think the diversity piece is crucial, and we need to have very honest conversations about what impact does that have on all of this being successful. And then my last question is, how much training have teachers received on the restorative justice piece so far? And how much is expected before it is fully implemented in the next year?
I would say we have received some training. Obviously, they want more training. So I know that that's what we've got planned for next year. I know in terms of Governor State being involved, having some things during institute training. I've been training them a little bit on restorative justice as well. I'm very well versed in restorative justice practices, so we've been having that open dialogue. But again, it's even through the circles, the teachers were concerned, thinking, okay, am I going to be doing this right? They are. It's all about building relationships and really having the students connect with each other and feel a connection. And I also think that will, also when we talk about fights, if they have that connection and that feeling that they have ownership and they're working with that person, then I think that students will be less up to maybe want to do something physical just by asking someone bumps into them in the hallway or looks at them wrong. There's a lot of research behind this. Oakland School District, which is in California, they're very successful with this. We had a large number of fights, and this restorative practices piece has really helped build a more strong, community-centered environment where everyone feels like they have a piece in the school.
I want to take what Jen said and tie it back to your second point. What Jen said about building relationships with kids, there is nothing there that I have reached out to some of my 8th grade students that are more prone to do these types of things, and I've said, I understand where you're coming from. You have me as a solution. Anytime you feel angry and upset, you can come to me. I had students who come to me, they may have walked out of class, it probably wasn't appropriate for them to do, but they recognized that the monitor was going up to that red. They recognized the fact that they were doing that, and they came down to me, and we were able to talk it out. But if I don't understand the experience of that student who doesn't have 2 parents, that student who's living in poverty, that student who has had a death in the family and is sharing the carpet with 4 other kids, if I don't have that training, that diversity training to know how to reach that kid, I'm never going to be able to build that relationship with them. So it is key to build relationships, but it comes back to what you said. We need to know, have that training, how to reach these kids when they're not going to want to be reached. It is a cyclical thing. It's a battle, and it's something that we need to be proactive in reaching out and talking with families and saying, help us understand what's going on out there. Give us tools that we can do to meet the needs of your child. Their child was an experience that did not have the same experiences that I had growing up. And I need to recognize that, and I need to focus on that. So it's coming back to that.
Can you quantify how much training teachers have received?
I know that we had discussions, we really started working on this in April as well, on the Kate Wilson, and then we also
that we've had teachers go over to sign up to go over to Serena and some other schools and look and see how things are being implemented there as well. Ms. Camillery's kind of been the one running this and so forth, so.
So it can't be quantified right now, but there is more training that's on the horizon, and more will happen before this is fully in. I mean, that's my fear, is that teachers don't feel confident that they have the tools and the skills that they need to be
And
able
they
to
do.
really implement.
It's all about just building relationships, and we're piloting this again in the 6th grade, we're rolling this out, so it's just a soft rollout, and then obviously continue, but it's a learning process as well.
Yeah, their relationship with GSU will be key. We looked at getting Dana Stevens, and he wanted about $50,000 or something like that. I just wanted to pass on that, so.
Yeah, Mr. Kennedy, I'm going to make the suggestion that maybe we can revisit this. But if I can make a closing statement, I think that we need to be very careful of what is the bottom line in terms of students. Students look to adults for direction, including boundaries. And if you're consistent with that, and it's, again, I don't know what goes on in Parker Hills, I don't have any kids there, I don't teach there. But in my experience, working with in discipline, I've been on numerous discipline boards at different schools, there has to be very, very, very clear sense of consequence, or a realm of consequences. And it has to be clear to students that they're not going to just come back to class if they're kicked out, because that sends a very crystal clear message that none of this matters, that there is no bottom line, and they can do whatever they want. Those are schools where it has just been mayhem. In the schools where there's been very clear and consistent support from top to bottom and from left to right, things have been successful. Okay, so that's what I would strongly urge. And moving forward, I think that is there any other quick follow-up questions? You know, can I have one or two questions from the audience so we can move on? It is getting a little bit late. And again, if we need to readdress this, we certainly will. Yes, sir.
I wanted to make more of a couple of statements. One, I want to thank all three of you because I've had experiences with all three of you, my two kids, over the years. With this new program being rolled out, I have a concern that this is going to become some form of juvenile probation, where I believe there's some kind of program, I think at Western's, like check in, check out, where then it becomes very subjective. I mean, you just mentioned, you know, if there was a death in the family, if a kid is having a personal problem, I would hate for that to be something that somehow gets them a step or has some kind of negative impact on their academic future, because those things follow you. So they're in 6th grade if they had an issue. Okay, so now the 7th grade teacher's like, oh, that's the problem kid. 8th grade, same thing. Then they're in high school. Now they get treated as if they're a problem as opposed to a student. I think a statement was made earlier about a student and referring to this abstract person as an offender. They're not offenders. That's a legal term. We're talking about children. These are kids. We need to understand that they're kids. I have a 12-year-old son. It's very difficult with 12-year-old boys. I have the same conversation with my son every day about washing his face. I can only imagine what you guys have to deal with from a discipline perspective with don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. But if we have what I believe are mostly good kids, then how are we dealing with those kids? And I don't want to have a situation where I'm talking to my son and it sounds like, you know, he's got to, you know, talk to his probation officer every day before and after each and every class. That's one thing I'm hoping is not going to become of this new program. I'm glad that the zero tolerance is going away because I think that is just a pipeline to prison. But at the same time, I want to make sure that we're not preparing these kids to feel like they're going to be in some form of probationary system for the rest of their academic life.
And that's why it comes back to building relationships with the students. If I know a child is going through a stage, child went through a stage for a day, child went through a stage for a year, it's incumbent on me as a teacher to go to that next grade level and say, you know, this kid, great kid, had a rough deck that year. Here's how you can reach him. Here's how you can get through him. I don't want those labels going from grade level to grade level, and I understand your concern on that, and that's why we have to build relationships with each and every one of these kids to make sure that we don't have that. We don't build those walls out and take them down.
Absolutely.
Okay, is there one more comment from the audience, concerned parents? Anyone? Yes.
I just want to say that I feel that we're very blessed with the Parker staff that we have, and we need to support the staff members wholeheartedly, from the school board to the administration. I really feel like all these ideas are great. I hope we're not talking about the same ideas this time next year, and we have to implement them swiftly and efficiently and clearly. The communication with the parent, I think, is the key. If we can have computers and make people sit through that, we should have parents sit down and be really clear on what our expectations are. These kids are in junior high. I'm just probably saying I really question this restorative justice. I think it's key. There's components of it that could work, but I think it's great for elementary school kids. But we need to be very clear that we do not allow students to disrupt, disturb a learning environment. Children need to have classrooms where they can learn. And if we are not allowing that to take place, we have a major problem.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much. I certainly appreciate your efforts in putting forward this program and certainly from one others. We'll look forward to updates as they come. Next on the agenda, dates for discounted student fees. Dr. Dustin.
Yeah. Ms. Labella? You're up for EF, G, HI, and stop at I. Mr. Lee will come up for J.
Okay.
We have historically done discounted fees, it's up to July 15th is what we've done, and the fee structure is already at July 15th date on it. But we're trying to condense the whole registration residency process, so we're not actually doing anything in June, and not until the end of July, because last year we really didn't get anyone paid, and those June days, and kind of seemed like a waste of staff's time. So we kind of pushed it all back, but in looking at that now, what that means is like our kindergartners won't have an opportunity for discounted fees, as will our new students not. So what we're asking is to move for everyone, including kindergartners, to the July 28th date, to give the kindergartners the opportunity to get into the system and be able to pay. Then August 1st, when we actually start our residency here, we'll price on that day. So if you wait that long to come here, then we pay full price. And then the new students, we have 2 days that are strictly for new students. If they pay that day when they come and register, we'll allow them to take a discount. Otherwise, if they wait after that date, it'll be a full. So that is our recommendation.
There's no further questions. That sounds fantastic. We will go to the next agenda item, which is student catastrophic insurance. Ms. Labella?
Historically, and I don't know why, this district has never taken student catastrophic insurance through our insurance carrier for the cooperative that we have our property casualty insurance. We do have regular insurance. We do not have catastrophic insurance. Now, it's not been an issue. However, talking to the other elementary districts, talking to our broker and our consultant, and there is some debate here as to whether an elementary school really needs it or not. However, we do know that concussions happen other places other than football, including basketball, cheerleading, PE. And if we were to have a catastrophic incident, it seems kind of silly that for $3,000, we're not covering ourselves. You know, when these are becoming way more to the forefront, and we're realizing just how severe concussions can be. So it is our recommendation that this year we do take the $3,000 premium and insure for student catastrophic insurance. Questions?
So this would be just for the district and not passed on to the parents, you know how?
No, this is really, this is the district. So if we do have a student that could come, then insurance, and they'll start the, you know, whose coverage it is and isn't and all that, but this way you're covered for those, you know, really things that we are not at.
Protecting ourselves.
There's no further questions. Next on the agenda, we have Fidelity Investments as a 403B plan investment provider.
It is our practice that we don't have an investment provider to our 403B plan unless we have at least 10 people who are ready to sign on and move forward. We've been approached by different teachers. The concern is that there really is no load option within our 403B plan. It's really more fees involved. So we've kind of done some investigating and would like to be able to provide Fidelity as an option for the employees. They would have to go and sign up and get an account on their own, but it does cut down on some of the fees and allow them to have a little more money invested as opposed to some of the higher fee plans. Like I said, we do have 10 people on. As soon as I have all that paperwork in place, we would move forward, but we would have to need the board's approval to add another provider onto it.
Is this information or will we?
Yes, we'll move it forward.
Thank you.
Yes, all these things. All of these things move forward. First it was Vanguard, but we use TSACG as our consultant on this tax shelter annuity consultant group. And what they do is they look after the district's interest in making sure that we are completely IRS compliant. So all of the companies that sign on with us are required to send the information over to TSACG, and they make sure that loans and all of those things are being done in compliance with the IRS regs. This came into play, I don't know, maybe 7 to 8 years ago while the district started doing this, when the IRS started auditing 403B plans and started having some serious findings. So these companies came into play to help protect us. Vanguard was the first company that wanted to use. Vanguard will not pay fees at the TSACG. The district uses TSACG, but the district doesn't pay anything. It comes from the investment provider companies. They pay the company to take care of it. Vanguard won't do that. So if you use Vanguard, the teachers will get assessed quickly to pay TSACG. So I was talking to TSACG and they said, well, if your idea is to use one of these companies, why not go with Fidelity? It offers pretty similar to what Vanguard is, and they will sign on to our agreement and they will pay a fee to us. And so that's why we switched from Vanguard to Fidelity.
My sense is Fidelity's fees out of the funds are considerably higher than Vanguard's. And so we're just paying the same amount of money out of different pockets.
It's possible.
The Vanguard fund fees are much lower, but you have to pay another increment to compensate the consultant, or if you pay it all at once at Fidelity, the fund fees are much higher. It's, okay, that's fine.
That, we've been requested, so.
Most important thing is for the teachers to be able to take advantage of that savings program, and to be in compliance with the regulations, so.
Any further questions? Thank you, Ms. Lavella. Next on the agenda is the Normandy Village construction budget.
You would approve the, obviously, we can do all the work, but we moved the project up. I never really got a formal budget amendment to pay for some of this project out of this year's budget, because we had initially thought that it would be a summer project, and then we moved it up to try to get the work here done prior to summer registration. So what I'm looking to do is add $250,000 into the capital projects fund to fund this statement and the work that's being done here at Normandy Villa. That's just got the first bill for our business today, so we know that we're going to have to be paying some the construction project in June. So we're going to add $250,000 to this year's budget, and then the balance of it will go into next year's budget for all the work that's going to take place around the district.
It's just a timing issue.
It's a timing issue.
No additional dollars, we'll just check.
Just a timing issue, one fiscal year versus the other.
Where does it come out of now in order to cover the current invoice?
That's what I'm asking for, to take that.
Oh, you're taking it out.
Yeah, so we'll add $250,000 to the budget for capital projects. Because the only money that was budgeted in capital projects for this year was completion of our.
questions? Now we'll move to the next agenda item, which is the tentative budget. Mr. Vella?
Oh, it's right here. It's on the podium.
Okay. Tentative budget. I'm not really too sure how to create a tentative budget this year, so let's talk about what that is. On the revenue side, one goes where to begin. House Bill 696 has passed the House, and it calls for a property tax increase. We're being told that probably won't, I don't know. We don't have the EAV yet from Cook County. I haven't gotten this year's levy yet from Cook County. The TIF is coming on, but that amount is still an unknown. So for me to estimate next year's numbers, it might be zero. I don't know. On the state side, or on the general state aid side, we've got two bills in the hopper. We got the governor's plan, which makes us a winner of about $700,000. But then you've got Senate Bill 231, Senator Menard's bill, which makes us a loser by about $87,000, so kind of flat. So I don't quite know what to do with that yet. On the federal side, we've not received any allocations for the title grants from the state yet. We have received allocations from IDA, which is relatively flat, but we've got an email today that said that they might be wrong and they'll probably be pulling them back. So, I don't really know where we're going. On the expenditure side, without construction costs, our largest costs are salaries and benefits, and we're currently negotiating. We do know that our transportation costs will be reduced. And I have put into these numbers the digital device refresh, which is the next item on your agenda. So going with very little of what I know, what I decided to do was let's just give you a flat revenue stream. No increase, no decrease. Okay, let's just call it flat. I added just for Yelps. I knew that I had 2% increase in HMO costs and we had no increase in PPO rates. So that information I have. So I went with just 2% on salaries, 2% on benefits. Why? Why not? Your purchase services are down 4.82%, and that is strictly because of our estimates on transportation. Capital outlay, which is just normal capital outlay, we've kept flat. Your bond and interest is up a little bit, and that's just because of what your bond stream looks like. We have added in that non-capitalized equipment is the increase for the digital device refresh, which you'll be looking at next. And there's a slight increase in termination benefits, which puts you at a deficit of $151,000, which for no revenue increase, I thought that was pretty good.
Reduction in transportation. That's
Over 3 years.
But annually, and that we got another.
Yeah. So really what I'm asking you to do is to take these numbers and say, okay, we know that everything's going to be changing and everything. You will get that full vote that you always get from me in July. It might not be by the July board meeting, it's going to depend on when all this information starts coming through. It'll be in the month of July, whether I have to hand deliver them to your homes, you'll get it in July. Then we'll post in August, or our budget, and so on, and I'll have your final recommendation with the budget will be at the August cap for a September, for a September 12th approval. I wish I could give you something better, but honestly, I don't have the information to give you. So until we start seeing things. Cook County will turn out their information. I just got an email at the end of this afternoon that they're getting ready to turn out the levies. So I know that they're on their way out. So I'll get that information soon. With that, I would normally say, I can do my tax, but I've got a bill sitting out there that calls for property tax raise. So we'll assume that we're gonna go with life as usual, but we gotta keep an eye on what's going on in Springfield. I mean, there's not anything going on in Springfield, but they may move things forward soon. So as soon as we get some information from them, we'll go with it, but right now, everything's kind of up in the air. So tentative budget, what we do, we approve it in June with these numbers, which basically gives authority to start keeping on payroll and all the other expenditures that have to start being extended in July, that we have authority to start moving forward and keeping business going as usual, but you'll be getting better numbers as the summer unfolds and we start hearing things. Any questions? I got a lot of questions, I could ask questions.
So rather than delay approving the budget, you want something to be able to work with?
Yeah.
Even though you don't have any definitives on something,
Exactly.
for the majority.
Right, exactly, but we know that we still have to pay the electric and the gas
Right,
and
right.
people and everything
I
else.
don't want to be like the state and not have a budget.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
Exactly my point.
Gotcha.
So, I mean, I'm hoping that this is kind of worst case scenario, but I don't know. So.
Remind me again when the TIF revenue is actually expected.
TIF revenue will actually not be expected until the second installment of next year, which will be the first payment of the 17-18.
Will the tax freeze affect Meyer? Or what do you think?
My understanding from people who I've spoken to, Chapman and Cutler came out, their bond council. They kind of looked a lot at this because there was a lot of questions about what that would do to our bonds, because our bonds increase, you know, and we have the authority to levy on that. And they came out and said they didn't think that the language that was on the table in any of these bills would hurt our ability to increase levies for bonds. And they didn't think that it would affect the property. That's one opinion. I have not heard any others. I'm hopeful that that is the case. It wouldn't seem to make sense if it wasn't. I mean, otherwise, how do you put taxes onto new property? That's what we've heard so far.
Thank you very much. Next on the agenda, we have a technology device replacement. Mr. Lee?
Thank you. Technology device refresh. This is part 2 of my presentation from the last committee of the whole meeting regarding as far as the refresh cycle. What we did was we formed a technology committee, and we had 30 staff members about from all the building levels. And from there, we sat down and had a discussion on whether Chromebooks or iPads would be the way to go moving forward within the district. So what we did was we set up a survey for them. So within that survey, we had discussions as they were answering the surveys. So majority of the applications that they were using was Puffin, which was Odyssey, Map Testing, NWA, Google Classroom, Google Apps, and some other web-based applications like Rackspace and all that. So that came from that survey within the committee. And after the committee meeting, we sent it out to the whole district staff to take the survey. So some of the questions that we had asked were, do you think a full-size keyboard is going to be needed? 76% said yes. said yes to that. Next was the big one that I'm scared of, you know, it would be an issue for the staff to convert the license from an iPad to Chrome. Surprisingly, 82%. So that's pretty good. Next was for an iPad or Chromebook for math testing. 87% said they would rather choose Chromebook for testing purposes. Then the overall question was, which device would you prefer the district to move towards? 77% chose the Chromebook. So I think for the value and cost savings, and also the benefit of us moving to a fully Google district, to utilize the Chromebooks would be a benefit for our upper grades, 6, 7, 8 at the current time. Because there's a lot of features on there. I've spoken to many of the Parker staff, and they love for it. So what I'm recommending is, I've looked at several devices, Acer, Samsung, Lenovo, and all that. I came up with the Lenovo because I surveyed with other districts, talked to other administrators, directors, and stuff. This was the most durable one out there right now compared to other districts, other devices out there. So what I can do is I can pass this around. You guys can take a look at it.
These would go home with the students.
Remind me again, why are we, because we run out of memory?
The problem is our devices are end of life right now, by ads. So with the new software updates and everything, it's not adequate for applications right now, for the new apps. We can still use it, but it's going to be functioning at the lower grade iOS.
This case comes with,
That's separate.
so how much are the cases for it?
It's about $20.
$20 per device?
Yes.
Are they good at protecting the device? Only because I used them at Bloom with all my students every day, and I've had one drop on the floor in Pratt. It still works perfectly fine. But do they protect effectively, or is it more of a psychological safety thing?
I could try and drop it, but I can't guarantee you.
Well,
There's always
I'm
something
asking
at that
is like-
time, you know? So what I did was, I also kind of reached out to other vendors too for sample cases. So this is one of them. I'm supposed to be getting a couple more this week and next week. So one was Gumdrop, was a brand where they had a sample, they had the video of the guy dropping it from like 5 feet and 6 feet and stuff like that. So I requested that one. So with that one, they do offer like a guarantee on it, but you know, there's nothing's been proof,
Sure.
you know, as far as the device.
And is that, I'm sorry, did you have a question? Okay. Is that price that you put up, is that just the device, not the case that comes with it?
Yes, that's the device and the warranty on it and the Chrome management.
Okay.
But not the
Price,
case.
is the case included?
No, this is included. I'm still working on it to see if I can get it at a discount rate. If I-
Okay, and I didn't check, is that a touch screen as well, or
No,
is
it's
it,
not actually.
and does it fully articulate to the other side? I guess if it's not a touch screen, it's my own.
What is this one? Is it me or does it still on that? Maybe it's me.
We went with, because there's different variations of Chrome. You can get the spinner one, but it's thin. So kind of went in between, in a sense, with devices.
So they'll be carrying this from class to class.
The responses, I wanted to ask, you said you sent it out to all staff, right? And only 74 people responded.
81.
81 people responded out of how many staff members?
Certified or not?
I'm sorry?
Certified or not?
Certified.
Certified?
Whoever you sent it out to.
You sent it to everybody, or just sort of everybody?
Any further questions?
Yeah, the iPads that we're putting out of commission in order to do something like this, is there any kind of way or, I'm not saying, well, buyback, we already, I think, addressed it, that is there any kind of way, any money they can be sold or wiped and sold or?
They're not going completely out of commission.
Take those and repurpose those for the K through 2.
So we would use those.
Yes.
Yeah, we're gonna add those to K2, and then once ever left, there is going to be a buyback.
Yeah, iPads are really great for kids who cannot do this yet.
Oh, yeah.
That's why special ed is also, there's a lot of programs, and, in little kids, it's the ideal.
Because currently right now they don't have devices in their hands, so by doing this, refreshing, so we're taking those iPads and repurposing them out for those students.
Well, there's no further questions or discussion. Thank you very much. This looks very promising. Next on the agenda, we have discussion of Homewood Flossmoor High School procedure for policy 7560. Dr. Duster?
Yes, this is just an FYI for the Board of Education. This procedure will be placed in our junior high handbook. What it is stating is that Algebra 1 in Geometry Honors, the student must get an A or a B in the class. If they do not receive an A or B in the class, they will have to take the class over the following year. As far as the world languages, it is a C or better for them to proceed to the next one. Just wanted the board to be aware of this. Information will go into our junior high handbook.
I have a question if no one else has one first.
I think I have one, but go ahead.
Okay, my question is, I noticed in here it said that if whatever they get goes into their high school transcript. Is that correct?
That's a little bit, we're still having discussions on that because we know that they have to have an A or B in the math class, for example. But to get an A or B, we give it as a pass or a fail.
Okay.
Okay? So those are things we're still waiting on direction from them.
Okay, so is it a policy of the high school then that they're pushing, whatever they get goes in their high school transcript, or is that something that we are making a sticking point in the program? The reason why I'm asking is that, and this is kind of my issue with AP classes that are, sold as, this is really like, college credit, college, it's not the same thing. And developmentally, kids who are in high school are not ready for college by and large. And kids who are in high school, I think we should definitely push kids forward to take these. I would hate for a kid to look at this and say, well, I don't want to risk getting a bad grade in my transcript, especially if they're a high achiever. I think that we should encourage them to take it again, and so that they are proficient. But that's something I would offer caution about as a sticking point where whatever they get, if they don't get that A, or if they fail, it'll be on their high school transcript. Because that's something that my students who are high achievers, hyper obsess about, and it just, I think would undermine the intent. Mr. Simmons, did you have a counter question?
They don't get an A or a B, they have to retake the course.
That's correct.
So if I'm a freshman at HF and I'm in algebra, and I get a C, I have to retake algebra sophomore year.
According to the
Okay, that's only for junior
For
high.
junior high.
Yes.
For junior high.
Yes.
For classes.
Rolled in junior high.
And Steve, Mr. Curtis,
Why
this is HS
would we
policy.
Okay, all right.
Are we taking the curriculum or are we not?
We have their curriculum for the
Then
algebra.
why are we subject, why are our students subject to identical criteria that theirs are. It's kind of like we're in it, but they're still dictating to us certain stipulations that are inconsistent at best. The short of it is I had a lot of concerns here. I'm assuming you're in conversations with Ryan and or Vaughn about this to the extent that you feel it appropriate for either one of them or the appropriate person to come talk to us directly to help us understand this. Might be a good idea. I don't know.
What this is what he was saying. I know that there were questions, I think Dr. Worker brought up, was like about the transition, about how our kids are succeeding there, that maybe taking the classes. I didn't know if they gave you any other information about the kids going into higher classes and not doing as well, if they looked at all of them doing C's. I mean, there's a correlation. I just want to hear it for that same reason to see if there's just why. If they're noticing like, okay, your kids have already got A's and B's and they get here, they're doing well. Or if we notice that even less than A's and B's are having struggling and we want them to be able to take it over. Or the question of what we're teaching. So I mean, and that might be more of a question like, using your curriculum or our teachers are teaching it, then what does that mean?
Good question.
Okay, good question. Did we hear from them before we have to approve this?
I'm
Oh,
not
this
asking
is-
for
this is
approval.
information, right,
This is,
their language.
it's just
Okay.
information, this is they've already approved this.
Yeah, to be clear, this is the high school
This is
policy.
high
They
school,
approved it
yeah.
on the 17th of May at their last board meeting. And these are their rules, what we're reading are their rules for
This is the
starting high school
rules.
credit while enrolled in the junior high, that applies to anyone. So to Mr. Simmons' point, it's a different conversation we want to have with the high school. I think, which is, are we not teaching your class, and is this how you want to teach incoming students in your district, which is very well maybe, I don't know how they're going to distinguish which districts they would treat differently.
So the conversation is just a conversation because they already approved it, so they
Yeah.
board has approved it, so
The
we're.
policy's been in place since 1976, and they've revised it 6 times, and they just revised it at their last board meeting. We don't have a red line copy, so if there are, I think it's the grade piece that's the
This is
change.
what was sent over.
Yeah, I think it's the grade piece that's the change. They used to just take them as a pass, and students were not allowed to retake algebra if they had taken it at Parker. Let's review this. The high school was adamant that students should not take, and they were strongly discouraged from retaking it, no matter what grade they had, or I think it was a C or better. But this actually might benefit some students who take it and don't do as well and want to retake it. So it's a slight change there, but it still doesn't benefit them positively. It might be a great piece if people care. Not everyone cares. Not everyone cares that much. But those are the pieces. It impacts our kids, so,
This is, yeah,
and the counseling will be our kids.
I appreciate the kind of the institutional knowledge that you obviously have about this. My sense is they may have lost sight that this is a mutually beneficial process. It provides our students with an accelerated path and the ability to earn high school credit in an appropriate way. But it also provides what they consider to be the majority of students going to their institution to be performing at a high level once they get in there. And to make that transition that much easier. So they get something out of this program being aligned just like we do. I think they've lost sight of that piece of it, that they get something out of this as well. And so it just feels like an inconsistent application here of what's going on. And while it is their policy and they have approved it, history shows that they're willing to revisit this. It may not be because we raise any concerns, but I don't want that to prevent us from doing so anyway.
I can talk to Dr. Mansfield more about this. Any other questions?
All right, with that, I'm gonna make the suggestion that we move, I'm sorry, my apologies. Next on the agenda, we have, first reading of revised policies. Dr. Duster?
Yeah, you have policies in front of you. A lot of these are the Senate Bill 100 information, and there's some information on there for the program of gifted. But this is our last batch of policies from press. And we're bringing that forward. So the information as far as the policies really deals with the new student discipline and some of the things that you've heard this evening.
I have a question for you. Matter of fact, I have two concerns. One, number 9, and I was taking a look at Senate Bill 100 as it relates to what you all have on the charts. And it was about bullying, and it says /harassment. And then we have in our policies a piece that deals with sexual harassment. And I really, I question this. I know we're blanking things.
What page are you?
Actually, it says number 9, page.
9 and 13?
Well, no, page 5 of 13. But on the thing, it comes up as 7 of 23.
7, disobeying rules, or number 9, engaging in hazing or any kind of bullying. That was 13?
Yeah, number 9.
Number 9, engaging in hazing or any kind of bullying, aggressive behavior, that one?
Oh, wait.
What policy are you talking about? What's the number?
Number 9 is what I noted down. I'm going to go to page.
7:190.
Yeah. Number 9. We have, it's number 9.
Yeah, that's it, right there.
Yeah. This is my concern, because like I said, I saw harassment, bullying and harassment. I have a real personal connection with this, and I'm gonna just put it real out here. I'll say if the majority of the people went home and asked their children, starting in the elementary level, all the way up to junior high, the majority of the kids would not even know what sexual harassment is. And I really think that's important. My daughter, oldest daughter, and the reason I have to take this up because see, I don't think things are isolated. My belief is if it's happening to me, it's got to be happening to other people. Some people are just not verbal; they just don't say anything. But I remember back a number of years ago, my daughter was suspended from Parker before your administration. Suspended from Parker. When I told this story, people were in disbelief. But she was suspended, and her part in the deal was, well, she's a good kid, went on to get a scholarship, never been in trouble. She had served a 3-day suspension for walking by a situation where a girl said something about she sleeps with her dog, but my daughter said, oh, that's nasty. She was suspended for 3 days. Now, legally, I could have fought that, but what I found, and my daughter just finished her first year of nursing school. She came to me a couple of weeks ago, and of course, they go through all these things in law and all of that. And she said, Mom, do you remember when I got suspended and you were mad at me because you told me I just needed to keep my mouth shut, that I wasn't involved in the altercation with this girl, but I made a statement? And I said, yeah. She said, what I found is the boards you sit on in these schools, they don't know what sexual harassment is. And I thought about that, and through the years I thought about that because I questioned the administration then. And I'm glad to know that we're getting trained. What I find really strange about this, and I guarantee you if you took a poll, because I remember that day so clearly when I took my daughter and I did purposely, I didn't talk to her about sexual harassment because I wanted to provide the administration an opportunity to ask the question. And I told them, ask her what sexual harassment was. She did not know. And I think something like this, we're going more into the workplace. Now, Senate Bill 100 does have harassment there. But I am just really cautious about this sexual harassment because again, I guarantee you, put a poll on the doors of all these schools and question all these kids, you will find that probably about 95% of our kids do not know what sexual harassment is, even at the junior level. Now, could they be partaking in some of it by touching and inappropriately and raising up somebody's dress? We can go into some fine lines there. And again, I find it real strange, it's way down on the total poll today, but again, 3 days of the suspension, the child was given for that who had no priors of anything, which let me know that the administration needed some training. And so when we're talking about all of this and the training that we know boards need to have and parents need to have, we need to make sure when we're sitting down dealing with these kinds of policies that we really understand what we're doing and making sure that it is understood on all lines and that people are educated, not just the parents and the board. And we assume because educators are educated that they understand because it's the way that people interpret these things. So again, I am really questioning that sexual harassment piece there because I do not, and again, I say go home and talk to some of your own children and you'll find out a lot of them just don't know. And again, we're taking this to a workplace where our schools, I know what we gotta do because of what law states, but this for our schools, I think we need to take a closer look at that. And if you're going to put something there and we're gonna, thank you, and we're gonna have these policies, we sure the heck don't understand what we're doing. And we better understand what we're, it should come down to utilizing that the staff really understands what it's meant. Now, on an adult level, we do know what it's meant. But I really have a personal thing about this. As well as, I want to go to another piece where we sit up and we say we don't want to put our kids out. But under disciplinary measures 11 and 12, if you go down to the disciplinary part, up to, I'm going to need that again because I'm going to bring my pen. But it's under disciplinary. Thank you, I'm sorry.
Did you say number 11 or pages? Number?
Under disciplinary measures, I'm going to go, I know it's further down.
Teen dating violence? That one?
Page 7.
And disciplinary measures takes place beginning on page 7 of 13 is what it says here. And we have a lot of reds going through. School officials shall limit the number and duration of expulsions, blah, 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 and suspensions. But then, yeah, we get back down to, on page, here, on page 9 of 13, and it's almost like we're upholding, we're done,
11?
yeah, like we're upholding, and maybe I'm not understanding that correctly, but it's like we're upholding, totally contradicting the piece of what we're saying up here, up further, trying to make sure that I understood that piece. Because we're saying one thing on top, and then at the bottom, we're saying something. a
Right,
little
if
different.
someone, so if we do have to suspend someone for the 3 or up to 3 and then 4 or more up to 10, then that's when that 11 kicks in. So we don't want someone coming to the school if they've been suspended for something, for activities or events like that. So that's what that's saying.
I got that, but then if you go back up further, because all these reds, those are what we're gonna make, is that what we're gonna make edits? Changes?
Those are staying, those are additional, they're new,
Those are the additions, the red lines.
not the strikeout.
Yeah, the strikers are the strikers. Up above, you have, and you have everything with the lines going through there. So that's what I'm saying, I'm not quite following, I mean, are we gonna do suspensions or are we not, or is this applicable to that three day or less, or every 4 day?
It's applicable to 3 and 4.
Of the 3 and the 4? Does
3
it
or
work?
less or 4 or more for suspensions.
Expulsion is also the term used if a student is placed in an alternative school. Can you read the footnotes?
Well, I did read the footnotes.
So that's the other key. Expulsion is.
Yeah, no, but what I'm saying, I don't think you're getting what I'm saying. We're saying that we're taking, like, the lines are going through suspension from school and all activities for up to 10 days, provided that blah, 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 but then we're turning, when we go down further, we're upholding these suspensions. So I'm not understanding the language of how this is being read. I don't want to belabor it, but I just want to make sure that if we're approving and we're doing something that is consistent. Because you say under here, school officials shall limit the number and durations of expulsions and out-of-school suspensions to the greatest extent practical, blah, 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 blah. But then down here further, you've got lines going through the suspensions as if you're not going to apply. And then further down, we're back to upholding the suspensions. So I just want to make sure.
I think they're just striking out the language because they added the new before it. That's what I think they're doing.
And it also says all of the stricken items were relocated within this section.
Are those ones you're talking about, numbers 5 through 10? That box?
She's talking 5.
So it's not really stricken permanently, it's just moved to a
So they're
different
moving it
portion.
to another part.
Yeah, so there's no inconsistency in when it's stricken and then added, it's just been relocated.
Okay.
Yeah, and there's like 49 different move transitions.
Okay. Well, the other piece on that sexual harassment, we need to take a look at it.
Your concern about sexual harassment as referenced in that is what? It says it's prohibited, is one of many things.
John, what I'm saying is that our kids don't even understand what sexual harassment is, and they're being charged with some of these things, and it's possible that they are, because I know personally that it's happened. And we need to know how to use that if we're going to approve something like that. Whereas in Senate Bill 100, if we're going to say we're going to uphold that, we need to be consistent. And Senate Bill 100, now I need to go in and maybe delve a little deeper into it, but today from what I saw on here, Senate Bill 100 just said harassment, which is general. This is more specific because after this it says harassment, comma, sexual harassment.
Can I make a objection? What I think, and I think this is, bridges both questions here, is that what we need is more clarity to the students about what's in their policy. And so that there needs to be some sort of age-appropriate activities that we can explain to students along the way in the socio-emotional learning curriculum about what's appropriate and inappropriate behavior. Is that?
Yeah, and make sure that our administration understands.
And that, so, and then from the adult end, that every effort will be made to communicate expectations to kids in a developmentally appropriate way based on the spirit and the gravitas of the language that will, again, be appropriate to setting expectations. Does that make sense?
To a certain degree.
Okay.
We just have to make sure that when my point is this, if we're approving stuff, we have to make sure that we understand what we're approving, because if it comes a point in time that we're using it, and just like when my daughter came home with a sexual harassment from being missed from school, she had no idea what it did. And I'm saying at the age level where we are in these schools, with being in elementary and in junior high, the majority of the kids do not understand what sexual harassment is. And that is generally a workplace kind of thing, even though the touching and all that, we can get into a number of things, and legally I'm not a lawyer, so I would leave that to, but I'm just saying, I think we need to kind of look at that or rework that or do something different.
Ms. Huckabee, what we do is after the policies have been approved, we discuss them administratively so that we all have the same understanding for major things, especially of this nature. And then as far as the kids, we'll talk about that, how we can emphasize that more so they have a better understanding.
Yeah,
Okay?
please.
I think, yeah. Okay. Are there any further questions? Okay, if not, thank you, Mrs. Huckabee. If not, I'm going to suggest that we table items M, N, and O to our next meeting at least, since it is now 10 minutes to 11, still have to go into executive session, which I don't think will be too long, and then we'll have to hopefully adjourn by close of day. So with that,
Is it possible to get your written report so we can have that, because we don't have how Could we get the written report so that we could,
It's not a written report. I sent you, everybody, the notes from that, from each one of the sessions that I attended, and then I'm doing an oral report based on those particular notes. But if you want me to summarize my notes even further for you, then I shall send you that.
yeah, I would have a written report of it, what we attended and, what the whole weekend, what it looked like.
I just said I'll send you another summary that I already sent you.
I'd like the whole thing so we can go.
I'll never send you that.
But if you send it to me, it'll be 1 minute.
And why do we?
okay, I'm going to suggest that this is probably a conversation that's more appropriate for a phone call, and with that,
No, it's not. It's appropriate for board meeting. District money, taxpayer money was spent on this. It needs to be documented. So it needs to be, I'm
Okay,
suggesting,
I'm
we
gonna-
need to see a written report in minutes.
And do we have her written report from the,
You didn't go
November
for me to go.
meeting?
You didn't pay for me to go to that. So you had-
But no.
I have a written report.
okay, I'm going to entertain a motion to end this discussion, and all of those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. And all those,
Nay.
thank you, nay. I am going to entertain a motion to enter executive session, discuss matters related to personnel 5 ILCS 120/2, C1, and negotiations 5 ILSC 120/2C2. Mrs. Primo, please roll call.
Marks? No. Odom? Yes. Simmons?
Yes.
Huckabee? Yes. Worth?
Yes.
Carol?
Reyes.
Yes, the motion is passed. We'll be in executive session for, I imagine, about 20 or 30 minutes.